Hello and welcome. Perhaps you're lying in bed right now, settling into the darkness, or maybe you're simply looking for a moment of quiet in a restless world. Either way, this is a calm space for us to drift together, exploring something both ancient and strangely modern, something that happens in the privacy of sleep, yet connects us to questions philosophers and scientists have puzzled over for centuries. Tonight, we're going to explore lucid dreaming, that curious phenomenon where you become conscious inside your dreams, aware that you're dreaming while the dream continues around you. It's a doorway between worlds, a threshold state that science is only beginning to map with any precision. Some people stumble into lucidity by accident, jolted into awareness by something impossible in their dream. Others train for months, teaching their minds to recognize the signature strangeness of the dreaming world. What makes this remarkable isn't just the experience itself, but what it suggests about consciousness, about the nature of reality, about the boundary between what we call real and what we call imagined. For now, just settle in. Let your breathing find its own rhythm. We have time for wonder tonight. There's a moment, brief, electric, utterly distinctive, when it happens. You're in a dream, perhaps, walking down a familiar street, or having a conversation with someone you know, and suddenly something clicks, a recognition surfaces. This is a dream, not a memory of that realization later, after waking, but the realization itself, happening inside the dream, while the dream world remains intact around you. Neuroscientists have found something fascinating in that instant. Specific regions of the prefrontal cortex, areas associated with self-reflection and metacognition, usually quiet during REM sleep, suddenly light up with activity. It's as if a part of your brain that normally sleeps through dreams wakes up while the rest of you continues dreaming. You become an observer and participant simultaneously, conscious of the dream yet still immersed in it. The strangeness of this cannot be overstated. Consciousness observing itself across states, awareness folding back on awareness. You're experiencing something that feels entirely real. The texture of dream grass under dream feet, the weight of dream air, while simultaneously knowing it's generated entirely by your sleeping mind. It's a peculiar doubling, like standing in two rooms at once, and it raises profound questions about what consciousness actually is, where it resides, how it operates. This experience isn't new. Tibetan Buddhist monks practiced what they called dream yoga for over 1,000 years, training themselves to maintain awareness through sleep as a form of meditation, a way to recognize the dreamlike nature of all experience. They understood something about consciousness that Western science wouldn't formally investigate until much later. That awareness itself can be cultivated, that the boundary between sleeping and waking isn't as absolute as it seems. In the 1970s, a Stanford researcher named Stephen LaBerge decided to bridge the gap between subjective experience and objective measurement. The challenge was simple but profound. How do you prove you're conscious in a dream when you can't speak, can't move, can't signal to anyone in the waking world? LaBerge's solution was elegant. He trained himself to move his eyes in a specific pattern while lucid dreaming. Since eye movements aren't paralyzed during REM sleep like the rest of the body, he could send signals from inside the dream, Morse code from another state of consciousness. When he succeeded, recording a prearranged sequence of eye movements while his brainwaves confirmed he was deep in REM sleep, he opened a door. Suddenly, lucid dreaming wasn't just anecdotal experience or spiritual practice. It was measurable, repeatable, scientifically real. Consciousness had found a way to communicate with itself across the border of sleep. And with that communication came questions, endless, fascinating questions about what this border really is, what it means to cross it, and what we might discover on the other side. So, here we are, standing at the edge of something both intimate and vast. If we can become conscious inside our dreams, aware that we're dreaming while the dream continues, what does this tell us about the nature of reality itself? If we can learn to shape and direct our dreams with intention, flying through impossible landscapes or conjuring entire worlds into existence, What does that suggest about consciousness and its relationship to the reality we experience when awake? These aren't just abstract philosophical puzzles, they're questions with practical edges, touching on how we understand experience, identity, the boundary between simulation and authenticity. When a lucid dream feels more vivid, more emotionally intense, more real than waking life, as many lucid dreamers report. What does real even mean? Is it simply the state we're most familiar with? Or is there something deeper that distinguishes one mode of consciousness from another? Over the next hours together, we're going to explore these questions gently, without rushing toward easy answers. We'll look at the science of lucid dreaming, the neurology and chemistry that makes it possible. We'll consider what it feels like, the texture and strangeness of conscious dreaming. We'll venture into philosophical territory, examining what lucid dreams might teach us about reality, consciousness, and the stories we tell ourselves about what's possible. There's no pressure to stay awake for all of it. This journey is designed to accompany you towards sleep, not take you from it. If your attention drifts, if you slip into dreams, lucid or otherwise, that's exactly right. Wherever you go tonight, you're exactly where you need to be. To understand lucid dreaming, we first need to understand the landscape where it occurs. Sleep isn't one uniform state, but a journey through distinct territories, each with its own characteristic brain activity, its own relationship to consciousness. You cycle through these territories multiple times each night, usually without remembering the transitions, your brain orchestrating a complex symphony of activation and inhibition, memory and forgetting, paralysis and vivid sensation. REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, is where most lucid dreams occur, though not all. During REM, your brain becomes almost as active as it is when you're awake, consuming nearly as much energy, generating intense sensory experiences, weaving narratives from memory fragments and pure invention. Yet your body lies still, held in a state of temporary paralysis that prevents you from acting out your dreams. It's a protection mechanism, one that occasionally fails in dramatic and troubling ways, but mostly operates invisibly, keeping you safe while your mind explores impossible scenarios. The brain waves during REM sleep tell a fascinating story. Researchers observe theta rhythms, slow, rolling waves associated with deep relaxation and vivid imagery. But occasionally, unexpectedly, they detect bursts of gamma waves, high-frequency oscillations typically linked to conscious awareness, to the binding together of different sensory inputs into coherent experience. These gamma bursts seem to correlate with lucidity, with moments when the dreamer becomes aware. What makes lucid dreaming neurologically remarkable is this. During normal REM sleep, the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive control center, responsible for planning, self-reflection, decision-making, goes relatively quiet. It's as if the skeptical, analytical part of you takes a break, allowing the dream to unfold without questioning its bizarre logic. But in lucid dreams, parts of the prefrontal cortex wake up, not entirely. You're still asleep, still dreaming, but enough to restore a measure of critical thinking, of self-awareness. This creates a hybrid state, something neither fully asleep nor fully awake. Your body remains paralyzed in REM metonia. Most of your brain continues its dreaming patterns, but that thin sliver of metacognitive awareness, the part that can think about thinking, that recognizes itself as a self, flickers back online. You become, in a very real sense, two types of conscious at once. The implications of this are both scientifically fascinating and philosophically dizzying. What does it mean to be partially awake in multiple senses simultaneously? Where does consciousness actually reside if it can be subdivided this way? Some researchers suggest that understanding lucid dreaming might help us understand consciousness itself, not as an on-off switch, but as a spectrum, a continuum with many possible gradations. Perhaps what we call being awake is just one configuration among many, one particular pattern of neural activation we've learned to privilege as more real than others. When lucidity emerges during a dream, Something specific happens in the brain's architecture. Functional MRI studies of lucid dreamers show increased activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, a region strongly associated with metacognition, the ability to think about one's own thoughts, to reflect on one's own mental processes. This area, usually dormant during regular dreaming, suddenly activates, bringing online the brain's self-reflective capacities while the dream continues around them. It's as if a spotlight switches on in a darkened theatre, illuminating the mechanics of the performance while the play continues. You become aware of the stage as a stage, the actors as actors, yet you remain in the audience, experiencing the story. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex functions as this spotlight, casting awareness on the fact that you're dreaming without necessarily pulling you out of the dream state entirely. But there's more complexity here. Other metacognitive networks also show heightened connectivity during lucid dreams, regions involved in self-awareness, perspective-taking, and what neuroscientists call theory of mind, the ability to understand that other minds exist and might think differently than yours. These networks, working in concert, create the distinctive quality of lucid consciousness. You're both inside the experience and aware of it from the outside. This raises a question that neuroscience is only beginning to grapple with. How does awareness fold back on itself? When you're lucid in a dream, consciousness is observing consciousness. The brain is both generating the dream experience and simultaneously recognizing that experience is self-generated. It's a loop, a strange recursion, the mind watching itself. Some researchers compare this to the way certain computer programs can examine their own code, or the way a camera can be pointed at its own monitor, creating infinite regress. But consciousness isn't just processing information, it's experiencing, feeling, being. When the experiencing part becomes aware of itself experiencing, something genuinely mysterious occurs, something that our current models of brain function don't fully explain. There's a hypothesis, still tentative and debated, that this self-reflective awareness might be related to the brain's default mode network, the system most active when we're not focused on the external world, when we're daydreaming or thinking about ourselves, our past, our future. In normal dreaming, the default mode network shows unusual patterns. In lucid dreaming, it may partially normalize, creating a bridge between the self-reflective awareness of waking life and the narrative immersion of dreams. What's remarkable is that this isn't a binary switch. Lucidity exists on a spectrum. Sometimes you're vaguely aware you're dreaming, but lack control. Other times you possess complete clarity and agency. The degree of prefrontal activation varies, suggesting that consciousness itself isn't one thing, but many things operating at different intensities, in different combinations. We are, perhaps far more multiple than we realize, not a single unified consciousness, but a coalition of processes that usually, but not always, work together to create the feeling of being one seamless self. The brain's chemical environment during sleep is dramatically different from waking life, and understanding this environment helps explain both why dreams are so bizarre and why lucidity is relatively rare. During REM sleep, acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter crucial for learning, memory, and sensory processing, surges to levels even higher than during waking consciousness. This acetylcholine flood drives the vivid sensory hallucinations of dreams, the intense emotional coloring, the strange narrative leaps that feel meaningful in the moment. At the same time, other neurochemicals withdraw. Serotonin and norepinephrine, which help maintain logical thinking and reality testing during waking hours, drop to minimal levels. It's as if the brain's fact-checking department goes offline, allowing impossible scenarios to unfold without triggering skepticism. You accept that you can breathe underwater, that your childhood home has rooms that never existed, that the dead are alive again, not because you've lost your mind, but because the chemical conditions for skepticism simply aren't present. This neurochemical environment creates what researchers call single-mindedness, complete absorption in the dream narrative, without the metacognitive distance to question it. the dreaming brain lacks the chemical conditions necessary for the thought. Wait, this doesn't make sense, which is precisely why that thought arising constitutes lucidity. Something has shifted in the chemical balance, allowing a sliver of waking-type awareness to pierce through. Interestingly, certain substances can alter this balance deliberately. Galantamine, an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, originally developed for Alzheimer's disease, prevents the breakdown of acetylcholine, maintaining higher levels through the night. Some lucid dreaming enthusiasts use it to increase the likelihood of becoming conscious in dreams. Early research suggests it does increase lucidity frequency, though the mechanisms aren't entirely clear and individual responses vary widely. This raises fascinating ethical and philosophical questions. If consciousness states can be chemically induced or enhanced, what does that say about their nature? Is a chemically facilitated lucid dream less authentic than one achieved through practice? Does the method of arriving at an experience change the experience's validity or meaning? These aren't just academic questions. They touch on deeper issues about what we value in consciousness, whether we believe certain states are more natural or earned than others. There are other substances in this territory too. Vitamin B6, which some studies suggest increases dream vividness and recall. Certain racetam compounds, even mugwort and other traditional herbs used for centuries in various cultures to enhance dreaming. The science here is murky, results inconsistent, but the human drive to explore consciousness through chemistry is ancient and persistent. What's perhaps most intriguing is that the brain already produces all the neurochemicals necessary for lucid dreaming. We don't need to introduce anything foreign. The potential is already there, written into our neurology. Training techniques simply work to trigger the right chemical cascade at the right moment. The brain knows how to do this. We're just learning to ask it more effectively. And this suggests that lucid dreaming isn't an altered state in the sense of being abnormal or foreign to human consciousness. It's a latent capacity, one we all possess but rarely activate, like a room in a house you've lived in for years, but never opened. The path to lucid dreaming begins with a strange practice, learning to doubt reality. During waking hours, prospective lucid dreamers perform what are called reality checks, small tests to determine whether they're dreaming or awake. They might try to push a finger through their opposite palm, check whether light switches work normally, read text, and then reread it to see if it changes. In dreams, these tests often fail in characteristic ways. Your finger does pass through your palm, text constantly shifts and morphs. Light switches don't control lights logically. The practice seems absurd at first. You're standing in your kitchen, fully aware you're awake, and you're asking yourself, am I dreaming? The question feels ridiculous. Of course you're awake, but this is precisely the point. You're not testing reality so much as training attention, building a habit strong enough to carry over into dreams. The habit of questioning, of noticing, of not assuming. This training relies on prospective memory, the ability to remember to do something at a specific future time without external reminders. When you train yourself to reality check whenever you see your hands, or pass through a doorway, or notice something unusual, you're encoding a trigger action pattern. Do this enough times while awake, and eventually the trigger fires during a dream. You see your hands in the dream, the habit activates, you perform the check, and the check fails in that distinctive dream way. Suddenly, you know. What's fascinating is that this works at all. It shouldn't really. Dreams don't have to obey the rules we set for ourselves while awake. Yet somehow the habit, ingrained deeply enough, persists across the state boundary. It's as if consciousness has a certain continuity, a thread that runs through waking and dreaming even though so much else changes. That thread can be trained, cultivated, made stronger. Some researchers frame this in terms of memory consolidation. During sleep, the brain replays and strengthens memories from waking life, integrating them into long-term storage. When you practice reality testing during the day, You're creating memories strong enough that they replay during sleep itself. The replayed memory of questioning reality becomes, in the dream, actual questioning of reality. The practice loop closes, but there's something philosophically peculiar about teaching yourself to doubt your own existence as preparation for dreams. It's a kind of mild, controlled paranoia, a systematic undermining of certainty. You're deliberately cultivating a mental stance that treats solid reality as potentially illusory. And while the goal is to recognize dreams, the practice can't help but bleed into waking life. After months of regularly asking, "Am I dreaming?" some lucid dreamers report that waking reality itself starts to feel less solid, less certainly real. The boundary they're trying to cross becomes, in a sense, more permeable in both directions. Is this a problem? That depends on perspective. Some might see it as destabilizing, a psychological risk. Others might frame it as awakening from consensus trance, becoming less hypnotized by the assumption that waking reality is the only reality, the most real reality. Perhaps the practice of questioning whether you're dreaming is valuable, not just for achieving lucidity, but for cultivating a more questioning relationship with experience itself, not as paranoia but as openness, as philosophical humility, as recognition that consciousness might be stranger and more multiple than we typically assume. There are techniques for lucid dreaming that work not through habit formation, but through direct manipulation of sleep cycles themselves. One of the most effective is called Wake Back to Bed, or WBTB. The method is simple in concept. You sleep for about 4 to 6 hours, then wake fully for perhaps 20 to 60 minutes, then return to sleep. During that return to sleep, lucidity becomes dramatically more likely. Why this works relates to sleep architecture. Your first few sleep cycles contain more deep sleep, less REM. But as the night progresses, REM periods become longer and more dominant. When you wake after several hours and then return to sleep, you're diving almost directly into REM, and that REM is often intense, long, and crucially occurs while your mind retains some alertness from having been recently awake. It's as if you're sneaking consciousness into the dream world by entering through a side door. Another technique, more difficult but fascinating, is called wake-initiated lucid dreaming, or WILD. Here you try to maintain a thread of consciousness as you fall asleep, essentially watching yourself drift into the dream state without losing awareness. You lie still, relaxing your body completely while keeping your mind gently alert, and if you can maintain this balance, not so alert that you stay awake, not so relaxed that you lose awareness, you might find yourself slipping directly into a dream while knowing you're doing so. The WILD technique requires navigating the hypnagogic state, that twilight border between waking and sleeping. This is a strange territory, one most people pass through quickly and without remembering. Hypnagogia brings hallucinations, sometimes visual, sometimes auditory, flashes of imagery, snippets of conversation, sensations of falling or floating. The body begins to disconnect from the mind's control. Sleep paralysis starts to set in, which can be frightening if unexpected, and the sense of self becomes fluid, unstable. What makes this territory fascinating is that it reveals consciousness as a gradual transition rather than a binary switch. You're not awake then suddenly asleep. Instead, there's a continuum, a threshold zone where characteristics of both states intermingle. The hypnagogic border can be trained, explored, deliberately entered with more control. Some cultures have practices built around this space: shamanic journeying, certain forms of meditation, the intentional cultivation of trance states. Scientists studying this border zone have found it's associated with increased theta wave activity and decreased muscle tone, but also with occasional intrusions of alpha waves. Typical of relaxed waking consciousness, the brain is switching modes, and during the switch, elements of both modes can coexist. For those attempting WILD, the goal is to ride this transition consciously, to be aware of the mechanics while they're happening. It's worth noting that consciousness as a spectrum, rather than a binary, challenges many of our assumptions about the mind. We tend to think we are either awake or asleep, conscious or unconscious, but experiences at the hypnagogic border suggest it's more complicated. Many gradations exist, many hybrid states. Lucid dreaming is one such hybrid, so is the twilight state itself. Perhaps even ordinary waking consciousness contains more variation than we realize, more subtle differences in how aware we are moment to moment, how unified our sense of self remains, how much we're simply reacting versus genuinely reflecting. These techniques, WABTB, Wild and others, aren't just methods for achieving lucid dreams. They're experimental protocols for exploring consciousness itself, for testing the boundaries and discovering what's possible when we approach those boundaries with intention and curiosity. Once lucidity is achieved, once you know you're dreaming, a new possibility emerges: control. Many lucid dreamers describe the ability to fly, to pass through walls, to summon objects or people into existence, to reshape the dream environment with thought or intention. This is often what draws people to lucid dreaming: the promise of consequence-free power, a world where you can be and do anything. The experience of dream control is genuinely remarkable. You decide to fly, and you lift off the ground. You want to visit a particular place, and it materializes around you, or you move through space impossibly fast to reach it. You wish for someone to appear, and they do, stepping around a corner or knocking on a door. The dream responds to intention with a fluidity and immediacy that waking life never offers. Neuroscientists studying dream control have found evidence that the motor cortex activates during flying dreams much as it would if you were actually engaged in physical motion. When you dream of running, the same neural patterns fire as would during waking running, just blocked from reaching your paralyzed muscles. This suggests that dream control might work through the same neural pathways as waking action, except directed at the dream environment rather than the physical world. But here's where it gets philosophically interesting. Are you actually controlling the dream, or are you just observing a dream about controlling it? When you decide to fly in a lucid dream and then fly, is your decision causing the flight, or is the dream generating both the sense of decision and the subsequent flight, creating an illusion of agency? This isn't just philosophical nitpicking, it touches on fundamental questions about free will and causation that apply to waking life just as much as dreams. Some lucid dreamers report that control isn't quite as simple as willing something and having it appear. The dream has its own momentum, its own logic. You can influence it, guide it, but not always dominate it completely. Sometimes when you try to summon a specific person, someone else appears instead. Sometimes the environment resists your attempts to change it, or changes in unexpected ways. It's as if you're collaborating with the dream rather than commanding it, working with a creative process that has its own intelligence. This collaborative quality might reveal something about the brain's narrative generation systems. The dreaming mind is constantly producing story, weaving together memory, emotion, and imagination into coherent, or at least coherent feeling, experiences. When you become lucid, you're not replacing this generative process, but joining it, adding your conscious intentions to the mix. The result is a kind of improvisation, a co-creation between your lucid awareness and the deeper dreaming processes that continue running in the background. Some researchers speculate that understanding dream control might teach us about creativity more broadly, about how the mind generates novelty, how conscious intention interfaces with unconscious processing. In waking life, we often experience inspiration as something that happens to us, ideas arriving unbidden. Perhaps creativity is always this kind of collaboration, conscious intention setting direction, while unconscious processes produce the actual material. The two working together in ways we don't fully understand or control, and this suggests that even when we feel most in control, most agentic, we might be surfing something larger than ourselves, guiding but not generating, steering but not powering. The dream, like consciousness itself, might be less a tool we wield and more a current we navigate. Perhaps the most surprising thing lucid dreamers report is how vivid lucid dreams can be, often more vivid than ordinary dreams, sometimes more vivid than waking life itself. Colors appear supersaturated, impossibly intense. Textures feel more textured, sounds more resonant. The air has weight and presence. It's as if lucidity itself amplifies experience, consciousness attending more carefully to the sensations it's generating or receiving. Neuroscientific studies offer some explanation. Brain scans show that during lucid dreams, sensory cortices, regions processing visual, auditory, and tactile information, show activation patterns more similar to waking perception than to regular dreaming. It's as if becoming lucid brings the brain's sensory processing closer to waking standards, while retaining the freedom and creativity of the dream state. You're experiencing the dream with waking quality attention. Some lucid dreamers describe a kind of crystalline clarity, a high-definition quality to the dream environment. They report being able to focus on details, the grain in a piece of wood, individual drops of water, the specific expression on a face, with a precision that surprises them. This clarity extends beyond the visual. Dream food can taste extraordinarily vivid. Dream music can be emotionally overwhelming. Dream touch can feel intensely real, sometimes uncomfortably so when followed by the realization that you're touching something that doesn't exist. This phenomenological intensity raises interesting questions about experiential authenticity. What makes an experience real? If we define reality by the quality and intensity of sensory experience, lucid dreams sometimes exceed waking life's reality. They feel more real in terms of subjective vividness, emotional impact, sensory richness. Yet we know they're generated entirely by the brain without external input. This suggests that reality might not be a property of experiences themselves, but something we attribute to experiences based on their source or context. Consider this from another angle. When you dream of eating chocolate and it tastes exactly like chocolate, is that chocolate taste experience less real than when you eat actual chocolate? The quality, the subjective quality of the experience, might be identical. The same taste receptors aren't being activated, but the same brain regions processing taste are active, generating the same conscious experience. Where exactly does the realness reside? Some philosophers use lucid dreaming to argue that all experience is fundamentally similar, brain states generating consciousness regardless of whether those states are triggered by external stimuli or internal processes. In this view, the distinction between dreaming and waking is pragmatic rather than metaphysical. Both are experiences constructed by the brain. Waking experiences just happen to be constrained by sensory input, while dream experiences run more freely. Others maintain a clear distinction, arguing that connection to external reality, the fact that waking experience reliably corresponds to a world shared with other observers, makes it categorically different from dreaming regardless of subjective vividness. The debate isn't resolved, may not be resolvable, but lucid dreaming places the question in sharp relief. What's certain is that lucid dreamers often describe their experiences with a kind of awe, a recognition that consciousness is capable of generating extraordinarily rich experiences entirely from its own resources. The brain, given free rein, produces wonders, and perhaps this is what we're circling around. Not whether lucid dreams are real, but what it means that we can experience something so convincingly real that we need philosophical arguments to maintain the distinction. In lucid dreams, you encounter people. Sometimes they're versions of people you know from waking life. Sometimes they're strangers, generated whole cloth by the dreaming mind, and sometimes, rarely but remarkably, they seem autonomous, responding in ways you didn't consciously intend, saying things that surprise you, exhibiting what appears to be independent will. When you're lucid and aware that you're dreaming, You know these characters are products of your own mind. They have no existence beyond the dream. Yet they speak, act, react. Some lucid dreamers report having conversations with dream characters that feel genuinely dialogic, as if they're talking to another intelligence. The dream character offers perspectives you hadn't consciously considered, answers questions in unexpected ways, sometimes teaches you things you didn't know you knew. This raises a fascinating question. Who are you talking to? One interpretation comes from Jungian psychology, which frames dream characters as representations of aspects of your own psyche, the shadow self, the anima or animus, various subpersonalities that exist beneath ordinary conscious awareness. In this view, meeting dream characters while lucid is an opportunity for dialogue between conscious ego and unconscious aspects of self, a form of internal integration work. Modern cognitive science offers a different framework, suggesting that the mind is modular rather than unitary. Different cognitive processes operate somewhat independently, creating the illusion of unified consciousness, but actually comprising many specialized systems. Dream characters might emerge from these parallel processes, representing perspectives or information that your conscious mind doesn't have direct access to, but which exists somewhere in the network of your brain. Either way, the experience can be uncanny. You're having a conversation with someone you know is you, yet they respond as if they're not you, as if they have their own thoughts, their own autonomy. Some lucid dreamers report asking dream characters directly, "Who are you?" or "What do you represent?" The answers, when they come, are sometimes profound, sometimes cryptic, sometimes disappointingly mundane. But the very fact that asking produces an answer, and the answer often contains information that feels like it's coming from somewhere else, suggests that consciousness might be far more multiple than our ordinary sense of unified selfhood implies. There are reports, too, of hostile or uncooperative dream characters, figures who don't respond to the lucid dreamer's control, who resist or argue, or even attack. These encounters can be frightening, challenging the lucid dreamer's sense of agency and control. Yet they might also reveal something important, that even lucid, even consciously aware and trying to control the dream, you're still embedded in processes you don't fully command. The dream has its own momentum, and parts of it might represent psychological material you're not ready or willing to integrate. Some practitioners use lucid dreaming specifically for shadow work, deliberately seeking out frightening or challenging dream characters, and attempting dialogue or reconciliation. The theory is that facing these figures, representations of repressed or rejected aspects of self, can lead to psychological integration and healing. Whether this actually works therapeutically is still being researched, but the practice recognizes something true. Lucid dreaming offers an arena where you can meet yourself in ways ordinary waking consciousness doesn't easily allow. And perhaps that's the deeper insight here. When you're lucid and talking to a dream character, you're experiencing the strange fact that your mind is larger than your conscious awareness, that consciousness meeting other parts of itself might be one of the most valuable things lucid dreaming offers. Not power or entertainment, but self-knowledge, the humbling recognition of inner multiplicity. Lucid dreams are fragile. Even experienced lucid dreamers often find their lucidity slipping away, the dream either collapsing into waking or sliding back into regular unconscious dreaming. You're flying, fully aware it's a dream, exhilarated by the impossible freedom, and then suddenly you're just flying without awareness, caught back in the dream's narrative, or you wake up entirely, the whole experience vanishing into the darkness of your bedroom. This instability relates to arousal regulation. Lucidity requires a delicate balance, enough metacognitive activation to maintain awareness, but not so much that you wake fully. The brain is walking a tightrope between states, and it's easy to fall off either side. Get too excited about being lucid, and the excitement can trigger full awakening. Relax too much, and you slip back into the reduced awareness of normal dreaming. Neuroscientists studying this phenomenon find that maintaining lucidity involves ongoing activation of those prefrontal regions associated with metacognition. But REM sleep actively suppresses prefrontal activity. You're essentially fighting against the natural architecture of sleep, keeping systems active that your brain is trying to shut down. It's exhausting in a neurological sense, which might explain why lucid dreams rarely last longer than a few minutes, even for skilled practitioners. To combat instability, lucid dreamers have developed stabilization techniques. One of the most common is rubbing your dream hands together, focusing intently on the sensation. Another is spinning your dream body in circles. Others include touching objects in the dream, looking at your hands, or verbally affirming that you're dreaming. What's interesting is that these techniques work not through any inherent property, but as attention anchors, ways to keep consciousness engaged with the dream environment, rather than letting it drift toward waking or unconscious dreaming. The rubbing hands technique, for instance, provides a feedback loop. You're generating dream sensation, attending to it consciously, and that attention keeps the prefrontal regions active while simultaneously deepening engagement with the dream world. You're giving consciousness something to hold onto, a point of focus that maintains the balance between awareness and immersion. Some researchers frame this in terms of attention networks. The brain has distinct systems for internal and external focus, for narrow concentration and broad awareness. Lucid dreaming requires specific coordination between these networks. You need to maintain metacognitive awareness, internal focus, while staying immersed in the dream experience. External focus. The techniques that stabilize lucid dreams might work by managing this balance, keeping both networks appropriately active. But there's something almost ritualistic about these stabilization practices, isn't there? Spinning in circles, rubbing hands together, they resemble the gestures and actions of ceremonial magic, ways of marking intention and focus. And perhaps that's not coincidental. Both ritual and lucid dream stabilization are about consciousness managing itself, creating structures and practices that maintain particular states of awareness against entropy and habit. The fragility of lucid dreams might also tell us something about consciousness more broadly. Awareness is always precarious, always requiring ongoing effort to maintain. In waking life, we usually don't notice this effort because it's constant and automatic, but lucid dreaming makes the effort visible, makes us conscious of the work required to remain conscious, and in that visibility, we glimpse something about the nature of awareness itself. Not a stable platform we stand on, but a dynamic process, a balance we're constantly achieving and re-achieving, moment by moment, awake or asleep. Time behaves strangely in dreams. Most people have experienced waking from what felt like an hours-long dream to discover only minutes have passed, or the reverse, a brief dream unfolding in the seconds before the alarm goes off. Lucid dreamers report similar temporal distortions, sometimes describing experiences that felt as though they lasted hours or even days within what could only have been minutes of REM sleep. The scientific evidence on dream time is mixed and genuinely fascinating. Early experiments measuring the duration of eye movements during REM sleep suggested that dream actions take about as long as equivalent waking actions. If you dream of walking across a room and it takes 10 seconds of eye movements, it would take about 10 seconds in waking life. This suggested a rough correspondence between dream time and real time, but subjective reports from lucid dreamers often contradict this. They describe experiences of extended duration, of living through elaborate scenarios that couldn't possibly fit into the actual elapsed time. Some report practicing skills for what felt like hours, having lengthy conversations, exploring vast dream landscapes in what objective monitoring reveals was only a few minutes of REM sleep. How can subjective experience and objective measurement both be accurate yet so different? One possibility is that dreams compress time through editing, the way films do. You experience the key moments of a long journey, beginning, middle, end, with the boring bits skipped, and your memory stitches these moments into a narrative that feels continuous. You remember it as having taken hours, but you only actually experienced the highlights. The brain fills in the rest retroactively, creating a false memory of duration. Another possibility is more radical, that consciousness itself generates temporal experience rather than measuring it. In this view, time isn't something external that consciousness tracks, but something consciousness creates in the act of experiencing. Just as a film's running time is distinct from the time period it depicts, perhaps consciousness can generate the experience of duration independently of neural processing time. A few minutes of brain activity might genuinely support hours of subjective experience if time is a constructed feature of consciousness rather than an external constraint. This gets philosophically deep quickly. Our entire understanding of causation, of before and after, of how things unfold depends on the assumption that time is objective and uniform. But if consciousness can experience time differently than it actually passes, if those scare quotes are even meaningful, then maybe time itself is more complicated than we assume. Maybe the felt experience of duration is primary, and clock time is just one particular, culturally agreed upon way of organizing that experience. Some lucid dreamers use reported time dilation deliberately, attempting to extend their lucid dreams by believing they'll last longer, by setting an intention for time to slow. Results are anecdotal and inconsistent, but interesting. Does expectation shape temporal experience? Can you dilate dream time through will or belief? Whether or not extreme time dilation is real, the uncertainty itself is valuable. It reminds us that consciousness and time have a relationship we don't fully understand. We measure time with clocks, with neural processes, with the rotation of planets, but we experience time as duration, as the felt passage of moments. And those two things, the measuring and the feeling, may not map onto each other as simply as we assume. Lucid dreams open a small window into that discrepancy, offering a space where time can be played with, questioned, experienced as less fixed than everyday life makes it seem. Lucid dreaming is often presented as purely positive, freedom, control, adventure without consequence. And for many people, it is wonderful, but there's a darker side, experiences that can be unsettling, sometimes genuinely frightening, sleep paralysis, false awakenings, loss of control despite lucidity. These are part of the territory too, and they reveal something about the vulnerability of consciousness caught between states. Sleep paralysis is perhaps the most commonly disturbing phenomenon associated with lucid dreaming practices. You wake up, or think you wake up, but can't move. The REM sleep atonia, which normally operates invisibly while you're unconscious, continues while you're aware. You're conscious but trapped in a paralyzed body. Worse, hypnagogic hallucinations often accompany the paralysis. A sense of presence in the room, pressure on the chest, visual shadows or figures, auditory hallucinations. It's terrifying in a primal way. From a neurological perspective, nothing harmful is happening. It's simply REM atonia continuing for a few moments. While consciousness comes online earlier than usual, the hallucinations are the tail end of dream content, crossing into waking awareness. It's frightening, but safe. Understanding this intellectually doesn't always help in the moment, though. The experience triggers deep survival responses, ancient fears of vulnerability and predation. Interestingly, sleep paralysis is much more common in people practicing lucid dreaming techniques, particularly wild. When you deliberately try to maintain consciousness while entering sleep, you increase the likelihood of catching yourself in that transition state where paralysis is active, but awareness is present. It's an occupational hazard, and experienced lucid dreamers learn to recognize it, to remain calm, to let it pass, or sometimes to use it as a bridge into lucidity. False awakenings present a different kind of unsettling experience. You dream you've woken up, that you're going through your morning routine, completely convinced you're awake. Sometimes this happens multiple times in succession. You wake, do something mundane, then actually wake to realize the previous waking was another dream layer. For someone practicing lucid dreaming, this can be disorienting, undermining confidence in their ability to distinguish dreams from reality. There are also experiences of lucidity without control. You're dreaming but can't change anything, forced to watch the dream unfold while aware it's not real. Sometimes this happens in nightmares, creating a peculiar torture, consciousness trapped in horror. It knows is self-generated, but can't stop. Some people report this is worse than regular nightmares, where at least you're not aware enough to recognize your own powerlessness. These difficult experiences point to something important. Consciousness isn't always comfortable with itself. Awareness can be a burden as easily as a gift. The state between sleeping and waking isn't always peaceful, but can be a space of vulnerability, where the structures that normally protect and organize consciousness are partially dismantled. You're exposed to the mechanics, to the seams in experience that usually remain hidden. But perhaps even these difficult experiences have value. They reveal consciousness as less solid than it normally seems, less protected. They show us that the boundary between control and helplessness is thinner than we'd like to believe. And they remind us that exploring consciousness, whether through lucid dreaming or any other practice, means accepting some vulnerability, some loss of the certainty that keeps us feeling safe. Not everyone wants to cross that threshold, and that's okay. There's no virtue in forcing yourself into experiences you find traumatic, but for those who continue despite the occasional fear, there's often a recognition that the scary experiences and the wonderful ones are part of the same exploration, the same willingness to look at consciousness directly rather than just through it. Most people who hear about lucid dreaming imagine it as entertainment, a chance to fly, to explore fantastic worlds, to live out impossible scenarios safely. And it can be those things, but there's growing recognition that lucid dreaming might have practical applications far beyond recreation, uses that touch on therapy, learning, creativity, and the nature of consciousness itself. One of the most promising therapeutic applications is treating recurring nightmares, particularly in PTSD. The technique, called imagery rehearsal therapy, combined with lucid dreaming, teaches people to become lucid during nightmares and either change the narrative or confront the threatening elements from a position of awareness. Studies have shown this can reduce nightmare frequency and intensity, improving sleep quality and daytime functioning. The mechanism seems to be that lucidity breaks the traumatic replay loop, allowing the dreamer to assert agency rather than remaining helplessly caught in the nightmare scenario. Another area of research involves motor skill rehearsal. Athletes have reported using lucid dreams to practice techniques, and some preliminary studies suggest this might actually improve performance. During lucid dreams, the motor cortex activates in patterns similar to waking practice. The theory is that this provides a form of mental rehearsal that reinforces neural pathways involved in the skill. Whether it's as effective as physical practice remains debatable, but it might serve as a valuable supplement, particularly for skills where mental components, visualization, decision-making, fear management, are as important as physical execution. Creative problem-solving is another potential application. History is filled with accounts of insights arriving in dreams. Kekule's vision of the benzene ring structure, Mendeleev's organization of the periodic table, countless artistic and musical inspirations. Lucid dreaming might offer a way to access this creative state deliberately. Some lucid dreamers report using dream time to work on problems, to explore possibilities, to engage with creative material in ways waking consciousness finds difficult. The science here is still early, still tentative. Studies are small, methodologies varied, results inconsistent, but there's a logic to the hypothesis. REM sleep is associated with memory consolidation and creative association, with the brain making novel connections between disparate information. Lucidity might allow conscious direction of this process, letting you pose questions to the dreaming mind and observe what it generates. Some researchers speculate that lucid dreaming represents a natural human capacity that's been suppressed or forgotten in modern cultures, a vestigial skill like squatting for hours or navigating by stars. Many traditional cultures have dream practices, ways of working with dreams deliberately for healing, guidance, and community insight. Lucid dreaming might be a rediscovery of something ancient, a capacity our ancestors took for granted that we're only now remembering how to access. Whether or not that's historically accurate, it raises an interesting question. What else might we be capable of that we've forgotten or never discovered? Consciousness is largely unexplored territory. We know more about distant galaxies than about the spaces we inhabit nightly in sleep. Lucid dreaming, even if it had no practical applications, would be worth studying simply as a window into consciousness, as evidence that our experience of being aware can take forms radically different from ordinary waking life. And maybe that's the real value, not the specific applications, useful as they might be, but the broader recognition that consciousness is flexible, trainable, capable of configurations we haven't imagined. Each lucid dream is a small proof that the mind is stranger and more multiple than everyday experience suggests, that the boundaries we take as fixed might be more negotiable than we assume, and that recognition, that opening to possibility, might be the most valuable thing lucid dreaming offers. Not superpowers or perfect control, but humility before the vast territory of consciousness we've barely begun to map. There's a question that lucid dreaming makes visceral in a way philosophical arguments rarely achieve. How do you know you're not dreaming right now? Not as an abstract thought experiment, but as a genuine uncertainty. When you're in a dream, it feels real when you're lucid in a dream, and it feels more real than most waking moments. What exactly distinguishes waking reality from dreaming? This question is ancient. Descartes used it as a foundation for radical skepticism. You can't trust sensory experience because dreams prove that vivid, convincing experiences can be entirely false. Zhuangzi told the story of dreaming he was a butterfly and, upon waking, wondering whether he was a man who dreamed of being a butterfly or a butterfly now dreaming of being a man. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition frames all of waking life as a dream, from which we might awaken to something more real. Modern simulation hypothesis arguments add a technological twist. If it's possible to create simulations sophisticated enough to generate conscious experiences, and if advanced civilizations would run many such simulations, then statistically we're more likely to be in a simulation than in base reality. Lucid dreaming provides a personal, experiential version of this argument. You know for certain that your brain can generate entirely convincing realities. You've experienced it. So how confident are you that waking life isn't the same process running more consistently, with additional constraints? The standard response is to point to differences. Waking life is more stable, more consistent, shared with other observers in ways dreams aren't. Physics works reliably. Text stays readable when you look away and look back. You can't fly or pass through walls. These differences are real and important, but they're differences of degree, of consistency and constraint, not necessarily differences of kind. Consider, in dreams, especially lucid dreams, there are rules too. Dream physics might be flexible, but it's not infinitely so. The dream world has a stability and coherence, at least moment to moment, and your confidence that you're sharing waking reality with other observers rests on information that comes through the same potentially unreliable channels. Sensory experience, memory. You've never directly accessed another person's consciousness to verify they're truly there rather than being sophisticated dream characters or simulation elements. This isn't meant to induce paranoia or solipsism. The point isn't to convince you that you're dreaming or in a simulation. The point is that lucid dreaming makes you feel, experientially, the fragility of the distinction. When you wake from a lucid dream that felt completely real, more vivid and present than an average Tuesday afternoon, it becomes harder to take waking reality's realness for granted. Not impossible, just harder, less automatic. Some lucid dreamers describe this as unsettling. Others find it liberating. If waking reality is in some sense another dream, more stable and shared, but still constructed by consciousness, then perhaps it's more malleable than we assume. Perhaps the laws we take as absolute are more like strong habits, patterns consciousness has repeated so many times that questioning them feels absurd. This is where lucid dreaming touches simulation hypothesis in a practical way. Learning to recognize dreams and navigate them consciously is practice for recognizing the constructed nature of experience more broadly. It's training in noticing the frame, in recognizing that what feels absolutely real might be contingent, might be one possibility among others, not to escape reality, but to engage with it more flexibly, with more awareness of consciousness's role in constructing what we experience as real. And maybe that's what reality hacking actually means. Not breaking the laws of physics, but recognizing that experience is always an interpretation, that the solid world you navigate is inseparable from the consciousness doing the navigating, that the boundary between inner and outer reality is less clear than common sense suggests. Lucid dreaming doesn't prove we're in a simulation, but it does prove that consciousness is capable of generating entire convincing worlds. And once you've experienced that capability directly, it's hard not to wonder what else consciousness might be doing that we mistake for something external and independent. In lucid dreams, you can break physics. You can fly without wings, breathe underwater without gills, pass your hand through solid walls, conjure objects from nothing, travel instantly across vast distances. The laws that constrain waking life, gravity, conservation of mass, causality, simply don't apply, or apply inconsistently. And this raises a fascinating question. Why does waking life feel so constrained? Why can't you fly here? The obvious answer is that waking reality is fundamentally different from dreams. It's governed by actual physical laws, not just brain-generated experiences. Gravity is a real force, not a simulation parameter. When you try to fly in waking life, you fall because there are objective forces acting on your body, regardless of what you believe or intend. But cognitive neuroscience offers a different perspective. What you experience as waking reality is also a construction, a predictive model your brain generates based on sensory input. Your brain doesn't present raw sensory data to consciousness. Instead, it builds a simulation, a best guess model of what's out there, and you experience that model as reality. This is why optical illusions work. The model your brain constructs doesn't match the actual stimulus, and you see the model, not the stimulus. In this view, both waking and dreaming are simulations generated by the brain. The difference is that waking simulations are tightly constrained by sensory input, constantly error-checked against actual reality, while dreams run more freely without external feedback. You can't fly in waking life not because physics absolutely prevents it, but because your sensory systems would immediately report the error. Your body isn't lifting, the ground is still there, and your brain would correct the model. This suggests an intriguing possibility. Maybe the laws of waking reality are partly perceptual constraints, patterns your brain has learned so deeply that it can't generate experiences violating them even when sensory input is removed. You can't fly in dreams either. Initially, children often can in their dreams, but adults frequently can't, or can only with great effort. Perhaps we've learned can't fly so thoroughly that our brains enforce it even in the constraint-free environment of dreams. Experienced lucid dreamers report that dream control often requires overcoming expectations. When you first become lucid and decide to fly, you might find you can't, not because dream physics prevents it, but because you expect gravity, and that expectation shapes the dream. Learning to fly in lucid dreams often involves techniques like jumping off a building to override the belief that you can't, or convincing yourself through internal dialogue that gravity doesn't apply here. You're not breaking dream physics, you're reprogramming your expectations. which in dreams directly shape what's possible. If we take this seriously, it suggests that waking reality's constraints might include a perceptual component we rarely question. Obviously, there are real physical constraints. You can't actually fly by wanting to, no matter how deeply you believe, but the degree to which those constraints feel absolute, unquestionable, might be partly learned rather than purely physical. Other constraints might be almost entirely perceptual, beliefs about what bodies can do, what minds can access, what's possible. Various contemplative traditions make claims about expanding what's possible through practice, greater control over autonomic functions, unusual mental states, capacities that seem to violate ordinary limitations. Whether these claims are credible is debatable, but lucid dreaming suggests a mechanism. If experience is predictive modeling constrained by expectations, then systematically changing expectations might expand what the model permits. Not infinitely real physical constraints exist, but perhaps more than we assume. The more radical speculation is that even waking reality's fundamental laws might be sustained, partly by consensus belief by the collective expectations of conscious observers. This borders on mysticism and isn't supported by physics as we understand it. But it's worth noting that quantum mechanics includes genuine observer effects, places where observation changes outcomes, where consciousness and physical reality interact in ways we don't fully understand. The relationship between consciousness and physical law might be stranger than classical physics suggests. What lucid dreaming definitely shows is that the subjective experience of physical law can be suspended. Whether that tells us something about waking reality's laws or only about the dreaming brain's freedom is an open question, but the experience of breaking physics, even in dreams, changes how absolutely constrained you feel in waking life. It's a reminder that human beings might be capable of more than our habitual experience suggests, that the boundaries we accept might be more negotiable than they seem. Even in lucid dreams, there are rules. Not the same rules as waking physics, but rules nonetheless. Most lucid dreamers discover quickly that while they can do impossible things, they can't do everything. The dream has structure, consistency, a certain resistance to arbitrary change, and this might be the most philosophically interesting aspect of dream physics. The question of why dreamscapes have any rules at all when they're generated entirely by your own brain. One of the most commonly reported rules is about text. In dreams, text is notoriously unstable. You read something, look away, look back, and it's changed. Or you can't quite focus on it, can't make the words stay still long enough to read. Some lucid dreamers use this as a reality check. If text behaves this way, you know you're dreaming. But why does text behave this way? You're generating both the text and the perception of it. Why doesn't your brain just render stable text? The likely explanation involves memory and attention. Written language requires holding information stable, accessing linguistic memory systems. Dreams don't excel at this kind of stable, detailed recall. They're better at emotions, impressions, narrative flow. When you try to read in a dream, you're asking your brain to do something it's not designed to do during REM sleep. So the system glitches, producing unstable text. Light switches are another notorious example. In dreams, they often don't work normally. Flipping a switch doesn't change the light level, or changes it in strange ways. Again, this might reflect how dreams model causation. Waking life is full of reliable cause-effect chains you've learned thoroughly, but in the reduced processing of REM sleep, maintaining all these learned relationships is difficult. The brain simplifies. Some of the familiar connections break down. Interestingly, your expectations shape which rules apply. If you believe firmly that something is impossible in dreams, say, reading clearly, it tends to remain impossible. But if you challenge that belief, sometimes the dream adapts. Some experienced lucid dreamers report learning to stabilize text, to make light switches work by essentially reprogramming the dream's rules through persistent expectation that they'll work differently. This suggests that dream rules aren't fixed features of the dreaming mind, but emerge from the interaction between the brain's general constraints during REM sleep and your specific beliefs and expectations. The dream is a collaborative construction between conscious intention and unconscious processes, and the rules governing it reflect both. This mirrors something about waking reality, doesn't it? The laws of physics are fixed and external in a way dream rules aren't. Gravity doesn't stop working if you don't believe in it, but your experience of waking reality, what you notice and how you interpret it, is shaped profoundly by expectations and beliefs. Two people can live in the same physical environment and experience radically different realities based on what they've learned to pay attention to, what they believe is possible, what frameworks they use to interpret events. Moreover, even waking reality involves negotiation between objective constraints and subjective construction. Social reality, norms, meanings, roles, is genuinely constructed through collective belief and action. Money works because we agree it works. Borders exist because we enforce them. Social hierarchies persist because people believe in and enact them. These aren't purely subjective, they have real consequences, constrain actual behavior. But they're not natural laws either. They're rules we've created and sustain collectively. Perhaps all realities, waking or dreaming, involve this interplay between constraint and construction. Pure chaos is impossible for consciousness. We need structure, pattern, predictability. Pure determinism is equally impossible. Consciousness requires some freedom, some space for novelty and choice. What we call reality is always somewhere between these poles, always a negotiation between the constraints we face and the meanings we create. Lucid dreaming reveals this negotiation explicitly. You can't do anything, but you can do more than you initially think. The dream pushes back, has its own momentum, but also responds to intention and belief. Learning to work with this balance, recognizing constraints while testing their limits, might be valuable training for engaging with waking reality. Not to deny reality's hardness and independence, but to recognize how much of what we take as fixed is actually flexible. How many of the rules we follow are rules we've accepted rather than rules that are absolutely necessary. The dream is a practice space for this recognition, and what you learn there, that reality is more collaborative than it first appears, that consciousness and world co-create experience together, might apply more broadly than you expect. Quantum mechanics has an observer problem. At the quantum level, the act of observation seems to affect what's observed. Before measurement, particles exist in superposition, multiple states simultaneously. The act of measuring collapses the superposition into one definite state. Different interpretations of quantum mechanics handle this differently, but all agree that observation matters in ways classical physics never suggested. This isn't consciousness mysticism. Observation in quantum mechanics doesn't necessarily mean conscious observation, and physicists mostly avoid claiming that consciousness has special causal powers. But the observer effect does establish something philosophically important. At fundamental levels, the boundary between observer and observed blurs. The act of looking changes what's there to be seen. Lucid dreaming presents a different kind of observer effect, one that's explicitly about consciousness. In a dream, you are both observer and observed, both the consciousness experiencing the dream and the unconscious processes generating it. When you become lucid, conscious observation literally changes the dream. The dream becomes more stable, more vivid, more responsive to intention. Awareness itself modifies what's being experienced. This suggests that consciousness isn't passive, isn't just receiving information neutrally. Consciousness is active, participatory, partly constructive of what it experiences. Even in waking life, what you pay attention to affects what you experience, not in the sense of changing external reality, but in the sense that attention is selective, interpretive, creative. Two people observe the same event and experience different things because they bring different frameworks, different histories, different modes of attention. In dreams, this constructive role of consciousness becomes extreme and obvious. You're not just interpreting a pre-existing dream, your awareness actively shapes the dream's unfolding. The dream responds to your expectations, your beliefs, your intentions. It's a tight feedback loop. Consciousness observing an experience that consciousness is simultaneously generating. Some philosophers argue that this isn't fundamentally different from waking experience, just more visible. In waking life, you're also observing experiences your brain is constructing, predictions and models rather than raw reality. The main difference is that waking models are tightly constrained by sensory input from an external world, while dreams aren't. But the basic structure, consciousness observing its own constructions, might be the same. If this is right, then the distinction between subject and object, observer and observed, might be less absolute than common sense suggests. You're not a consciousness looking at an independent reality. You're consciousness participating in the ongoing construction of experience, partly creating what you observe through the act of observation itself. This doesn't mean reality is purely subjective. There are constraints, inputs, objective features, but it suggests that consciousness and reality are more entangled than dualistic thinking assumes. Lucid dreaming trains you to notice this entanglement. When you see the dream change in response to your awareness, when you feel your expectations directly shaping what happens next, you experience consciousness as causal, as having power not just to interpret, but to construct. And while dream construction is more obvious than waking construction, the principle might extend. Consciousness always has some constructive role, always participates in creating the experience it then takes as passively received reality. This has practical implications. If attention partly constructs experience, then how you attend matters profoundly. Bringing curiosity versus judgment, openness versus defensiveness, wonder versus cynicism, these aren't just interpretive frames applied after the fact, but partly shape what experience arises in the first place. The observer effect in consciousness suggests that you have more agency than you might assume, not agency over external reality, but agency over how consciousness engages with reality, which in turn shapes what that reality becomes for you. There's also a humbling dimension. If consciousness constructs what it experiences, then you can't trust experience as objective truth. The dream feels real until you wake up. The waking world feels real, but might also be a construction, less arbitrary than dreams, better calibrated to external constraints, but still built by consciousness rather than directly presented to it. This introduces necessary uncertainty, philosophical humility, recognition that consciousness is always interpreting, always mediating, never purely transparent to reality. Perhaps that's the deepest lesson of the observer effect in lucid dreaming. Consciousness is not separate from reality. Looking at it from outside, consciousness is embedded in reality, participating in it, partly constructing it. Recognizing this participation, this co-creation, changes what consciousness can do, changes what reality becomes. There's a case to be made that lucid dreaming is valuable, not primarily for the dreams themselves, but for what it trains consciousness to do, to recognize constructed nature of experience, to question automatic assumptions, to engage with reality as something more negotiable than it typically appears. This training might transfer to waking life in subtle but significant ways. When you practice reality testing, repeatedly asking, "Am I dreaming?" during the day, you're cultivating a particular kind of attention, a meta-awareness that doesn't just experience but questions and reflects. This is similar to what contemplative traditions call mindfulness or metacognitive awareness. You're creating distance between immediate experience and the self that observes experience, introducing a gap where choice and reflection can occur. In terms of neuroscience, this involves strengthening connections between experiential and metacognitive networks, making it easier to engage the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and other regions associated with self-reflection. These networks are trainable through practice, and training them has effects beyond dreaming. People who practice lucid dreaming often report increased metacognitive awareness during waking hours, greater ability to notice their own mental processes, to catch themselves in habitual patterns, to insert reflection between stimulus and response. There's research in neuroplasticity suggesting that mental training can reshape brain structure and function. Meditation practices, for instance, produce measurable changes in brain regions associated with attention, emotion regulation, and self-awareness. Lucid dreaming practice likely works similarly, strengthening specific neural pathways through repeated activation, and the capacities strengthened: metacognitive awareness, cognitive flexibility, recognition of mental content as mental content rather than external reality, have broad applicability. Consider how beliefs shape perception. You experience what you expect to experience, notice what you've learned to notice, interpret ambiguity according to your assumptions. This is true for everyone, operating largely unconsciously, but if you've trained yourself to question reality, to notice when you're making assumptions, to recognize experience as constructed, you gain some leverage, not complete freedom from perceptual biases. Those are deeply ingrained, but more space to question them, to try alternative interpretations, to hold beliefs lightly. This is what reality flexibility might mean. Not the ability to change external reality through intention, but the ability to recognize which aspects of your experience are constructed, interpretive, potentially changeable. Much of what feels like external constraint is actually internal. Habits of thought, ingrained beliefs, unquestioned assumptions about what's possible. Lucid dreaming practice can make these internal constraints more visible and therefore more negotiable. Some lucid dreamers report that the practice changes their relationship with waking life in unexpected ways. They feel less trapped by circumstances, more able to see situations from multiple perspectives, more willing to try unconventional solutions. This isn't magical thinking. They're not claiming external reality bends to their will. It's more that their sense of what's possible expands. Their habitual responses become more flexible. Their worldview becomes less rigid. There's also an ethical dimension. If you've experienced directly how convincing dreams can be, how completely you can believe in something that turns out to be illusion, you might become more humble about your waking beliefs, more willing to admit you might be wrong, more open to others' radically different experiences and perspectives. The certainty we usually feel about our perceptions and beliefs is revealed as optional, as a choice rather than inevitable given. This kind of epistemological humility, recognition that your experience of reality is mediated, constructed, potentially mistaken, can be destabilizing, but it can also be liberating, opening space for change, growth, revised understanding. You become more comfortable with uncertainty, with not knowing, with the possibility that reality is stranger and more multiple than any single perspective can capture. In the end, lucid dreaming as training for reality flexibility isn't about gaining supernatural powers or escaping reality. It's about developing a more flexible, more aware, more questioning relationship with experience. It's about recognizing consciousness as active rather than passive, as participant rather than spectator. And this recognition, practiced nightly in dreams and then carried into waking life, might be one of the most valuable things conscious dreaming offers. Not control over external reality, but deeper understanding of consciousness's role in constructing the reality we experience, which is perhaps a different kind of power entirely. When you're lucid in a dream, aware that you're dreaming, the strange question emerges: who is aware? There's the character in the dream, the figure walking through the dreamscape with a dream body. And there's the awareness observing this, the consciousness that knows this is a dream. Are these the same you, or different aspects of yourself? Where does the self actually reside in this doubled awareness? This isn't just an abstract puzzle. Lucid dreamers often report a distinctive quality of identity during lucid dreams, simultaneously being the character in the dream and watching that character from some other vantage point. You're both actor and audience, subject and observer. The experience is literally self-contradictory. You are both inside the dream and outside it, both identified with the dream self and distanced from it. Buddhist philosophy, particularly the concept of an Atman or no self, offers one framework for thinking about this. In this view, what we call self isn't a unified entity, but a process, a constantly shifting configuration of mental events. There's no single thing that is you. Instead, there's just experience arising and passing, with a retrospective sense of continuity, creating the illusion of persistent identity. Lucid dreaming might reveal this multiplicity directly, showing that consciousness can split into observer and observed, that selfhood is more like a coalition than a monarchy. Modern neuroscience offers complementary insights. The default mode network, active during self-referential thinking and mind-wandering, shows altered patterns during dreaming. Research suggests that the sense of self isn't generated by one brain region, but emerges from interactions between multiple networks, systems for body awareness, autobiographical memory, perspective taking, emotional regulation. What we experience as I is the sum of these processes, but they can partially decompose, creating experiences like lucid dreaming where self-awareness exists without the normal unity. This has profound implications. If selfhood is processual rather than substantial, if you're not one thing but many poses usually coordinated, then perhaps the self you experience in waking life is also less unified than it seems. You might be multiple, containing different perspectives, different drives, different modes of awareness that take turns being foregrounded, or that sometimes conflict. Some lucid dreamers explore this deliberately, attempting to observe the construction of identity within the dream. They notice how dream thoughts arise without a sense of generating them, how dream actions unfold without deliberate choice, yet how there's still a sense of I present. This can be disorienting. If thoughts arise without you thinking them, actions occur without you choosing them, where are you in all this? What remains when the usual sense of authorship falls away? The experience can also be liberating. If selfhood is constructed moment by moment rather than being a fixed thing, then you have more flexibility, more capacity for change. You're not stuck being one particular self. You're a process that can be adjusted, reconstituted, approached differently. The boundaries you assume are essential. This is who I am might be more like habits, patterns that feel fixed because they're deeply ingrained, but that could potentially shift with awareness and effort. There's a risk here too. Some people who practice lucid dreaming extensively report occasional dissociative experiences, difficulty distinguishing dream memories from waking memories, a sense of unstable identity. If you spend too much time watching yourself from outside, the unity of selfhood can feel fragile, uncertain. Most practitioners don't experience this as a problem, and when they do, it's usually temporary, but it points to something real. The self requires ongoing construction work, and practices that make that construction visible can sometimes destabilize it. The question, who is the dreamer, doesn't have a clean answer. Maybe you are both the dream character and the observing awareness. Maybe you're neither, just a process of experiencing that temporarily takes different forms. Maybe the question itself is wrong, presupposing a unified self that doesn't actually exist. What's certain is that lucid dreaming makes the question visceral, makes you feel the strangeness of consciousness observing itself, makes selfhood seem less like a noun and more like a verb, not something you are but something you do, moment by moment, awake or asleep. In lucid dreams you can create worlds, not just modify or explore them, actually bring them into existence. You decide a mountain should appear, and it does. You imagine a city, and suddenly you're walking through streets your sleeping mind is generating in real time. Some lucid dreamers report creating entire landscapes, populated with characters who move and speak independently, complete with detail and coherence that far exceeds what conscious will alone should be able to produce. This creative capacity is genuinely extraordinary. Consider the computational power required. The brain is rendering visual landscapes in high detail, generating appropriate lighting and shadows, maintaining spatial coherence as you move through the space, populating it with characters who have faces, voices, behaviors, and it's doing all this in real time, on the fly, without conscious effort. Your waking mind couldn't deliberately create something this complex this quickly, yet your dreaming mind does it effortlessly. Cognitive science attributes this to the brain's narrative generation and memory synthesis systems. During REM sleep, the brain is highly active, pulling fragments from memory, visual patterns, spatial layouts, faces, voices, emotional associations, and weaving them into coherent experience. You're not creating from nothing, you're remixing, recombining existing material in novel ways. The dream city might feel original, but it's built from pieces of cities you've vinned, architectural patterns you've absorbed, spatial relationships you've navigated. Still, the subjective experiences of creation, of bringing something into existence through intention, and this raises philosophical questions about consciousness and reality generation. If your sleeping mind can create entire coherent worlds, complete with physics, narrative logic, and seemingly autonomous characters, what does that suggest about the nature of consciousness, about its relationship to what we call reality? One perspective is that this reveals consciousness as fundamentally creative, not just receptive. We tend to think of consciousness as a spotlight illuminating what's already there, but dreams suggest consciousness is more like a projector, generating the experience rather than just witnessing it. And if that's true for dreams, perhaps it's also true, in a more constrained way, for waking experience. Maybe waking consciousness is also constantly creating, constructing reality from sensory input, rather than simply receiving it. This gets at phenomenology's insight that experience is always constructed. There's no unmediated access to reality. What you experience is always already interpretation, synthesis, construction. The waking world feels given, discovered rather than created, because the construction happens automatically and unconsciously. But dreams reveal the process explicitly, consciousness creating worlds and then inhabiting them as if they were independent. Some lucid dreamers push this further, exploring what they can create with deliberate intention. They describe attempting to generate specific places, specific people, testing the limits of dream creation. What they often discover is that while they can guide creation, they can't fully control it. The dream has its own generative logic. You intend a forest, and a forest appears, but not exactly as you imagined. The trees are wrong, or there's a building that shouldn't be there, or the forest transitions unexpectedly into a desert. It's as if you're collaborating with unconscious processes, suggesting directions while those processes handle the actual generation. This collaborative quality might tell us something important about creativity generally. When artists or writers talk about inspiration, about ideas coming to them, about characters taking on lives of their own, they're describing something similar: conscious intention working with unconscious generativity. The conscious mind sets parameters, poses problems, chooses directions. The unconscious mind generates material, makes novel connections, produces possibilities the conscious mind didn't foresee. Creativity emerges from the interaction between these modes, neither one sufficient alone. Dreams might be a purer form of this process, with conscious intention more minimal and unconscious generativity more obvious. But waking creativity likely works similarly, involving partnership between conscious and unconscious, intention and emergence, control and surprise. There's also a deeper question here about what it means to create versus discover. When you generate a dream city, did you create it or discover it? If the material comes from memory and unconscious processing, not from conscious will, then maybe you're discovering something that was already potential. already latent in your brain's stored information. The distinction between creation and discovery starts to blur. Maybe all creation is actually discovery, finding new combinations and expressions of what was already there in potential form. And if consciousness in dreams is creating worlds, might consciousness in waking be doing something similar? Not creating the external physical world, which exists independently, but creating the experienced world, the world as it appears to consciousness, which is always constructed, interpreted, rendered from raw sensory input into meaningful experience. Perhaps we're always creating worlds, awake or asleep. The difference is just how much constraint we face, how much external reality pushes back against the constructions consciousness generates. If you're lucid in a dream and can control it, does your behavior matter? If you harm a dream character, are you doing something wrong? These might seem like absurd questions. Of course, dream behavior doesn't matter morally. Nothing real is being affected, but the questions become less absurd the more carefully you consider them. Dream characters, when you're lucid, are strange entities. You know intellectually they're generated by your own mind, that they're not real people, yet they often behave as if they're autonomous, responding in ways you didn't consciously intend, saying things that surprise you, exhibiting what appears to be independent will. Some dream characters, when asked directly, claim to be real, to have their own consciousness. Obviously they're not. You're dreaming. They're dream constructs. But the phenomenology is uncanny. If a dream character seems to suffer when you harm them, does that matter? They're not conscious in any independent sense. There's no one there to actually suffer. Yet your brain is generating something that resembles suffering, that feels like suffering from your perspective as observed. Is that morally neutral simply because it's occurring in a dream? One argument says yes, absolutely neutral. Morality concerns effects on conscious beings, on entities capable of actual suffering or flourishing. Dream characters aren't conscious, so they're not moral subjects. You could do anything to them without moral consequence, just as you can delete characters in a video game or erase drawings without moral qualm. The behavior might reveal something about your psychology, but it's not itself right or wrong. Another perspective is less certain. Virtue ethics suggests that what matters isn't just consequences, but the kind of person you're becoming through your actions. Habitually cruel behavior, even toward beings that aren't conscious, might shape character negatively, making cruelty more natural, more available. If you spend dream time harming dream characters, does that make you a crueler person when awake? It's an empirical question without clear evidence, but the concern isn't trivial. There's also the question of how dream behavior affects your own psychological well-being. If you use lucid dreams to act out violent or transgressive impulses, does that serve as healthy release? Or does it reinforce and strengthen those impulses? Psychological research on this is limited, with different therapists taking different positions. Some suggest that dreams are safe spaces for exploring shadow material, for integrating disowned aspects of self. Others worry about reinforcing patterns better left unexpressed. The uncertainty itself is interesting. It reveals that our moral intuitions don't clearly cover consciousness-like entities that aren't actually conscious. We're built to respond to apparent suffering, to treat human-like entities as morally relevant. Dream characters trigger these responses despite not being real moral subjects. The collision between intellectual understanding and emotional response creates genuine ethical confusion. Some lucid dreamers report avoiding harmful behavior in dreams not because they think it's wrong, but because it feels wrong, or because treating dream characters respectfully seems to improve dream quality, making characters more cooperative and the dream more pleasant. This is pragmatic rather than moral reasoning, but it produces similar outcomes. There are also questions about consent in lucid dreams, particularly around sexual content. If you're lucid and interact sexually with a dream character resembling someone you know, is that problematic? The dream character isn't the actual person. There's no victim, no one whose consent is violated. Yet it might violate the real person's dignity in some way, treating them mentally as a sexual object without their knowledge or consent. Or maybe not. Maybe private fantasies, even highly detailed ones, are ethically neutral as long as they remain private. These questions extend beyond dreams. As virtual reality and AI improve, we'll increasingly interact with entities that seem conscious but aren't. Simulations sophisticated enough to trigger our social and moral responses, despite lacking actual consciousness. How should we treat them? Does it matter only whether they're conscious, or do appearances matter too? Dreams are early encounter with this category confusion, and how we think about dream ethics might inform how we approach AI ethics, VR ethics, the ethics of created minds and simulated beings. What's clear is that consciousness complicates ethics in ways we don't fully understand. We're not just concerned with abstract principles, but with lived experience, with how things feel. And when dream experiences feel intensely real, when dream characters seem genuinely to suffer or flourish, pure intellectual dismissal doesn't quite satisfy. Perhaps the right stance is humble uncertainty. Recognition that consciousness and reality are stranger than our ethical frameworks easily accommodate. That dreams open questions our moral theories weren't built to answer. There are reports, anecdotal but persistent across cultures and time periods, of shared dreams, instances where multiple people claim and have had the same dream, or to have met each other in dreams and remembered the interaction from both sides. Most lucid dreamers are skeptical of these reports. Dreams are private, products of individual brains. There's no known mechanism for one person's dream to connect with another's. Yet the reports continue. Pairs of people, especially those emotionally close, sometimes describe experiencing the same dream location simultaneously, encountering each other there, and waking with aligned memories of the interaction. Indigenous cultures have traditions of dream sharing, practices for meeting in shared dream space. Certain contemporary communities deliberately attempt mutual lucid dreaming, with some participants claiming success. Scientific investigation of shared dreaming faces obvious challenges. How do you design a controlled experiment? Even if two people report similar dreams, how do you rule out coincidence, or one person unconsciously influencing the other's report? The few formal studies attempted have produced null or ambiguous results. Most sleep researchers dismiss shared dreaming as either fabrication, misremembered after the fact coordination, or cherry-picked coincidences that ignore the vastly more common cases of dream experiences that don't match. And yet the phenomenon won't quite die. Some parapsychology researchers, like Jane Gackenbach, have collected data suggesting weak correlations between dreamers' reports beyond chance expectation. Critics question the methodologies, the statistical analyses, the replicability. The evidence remains disputed, definitely not strong enough to convince mainstream science, but intriguing enough to prevent complete dismissal. What's philosophically interesting is what shared dreaming would imply if it were real. It would suggest consciousness isn't entirely local, isn't completely contained within individual brains. There would be some form of non-local connection, some way for conscious states to be shared or accessed across spatial separation. This doesn't require full telepathy, maybe just occasional fuzzy dream-level information exchange, but even that would profoundly challenge materialist models of consciousness. Current neuroscience treats consciousness as produced by brain activity, local to the skull. Information can be shared between brains through normal channels, speech, writing, sensory observation, but not directly, not brain to brain without intermediary. Shared dreaming, if real, would require reconceptualizing consciousness as something that can extend or connect beyond individual brains, at least under certain conditions. Some theoretical frameworks could accommodate this. Quantum consciousness theories, controversial and not widely accepted, propose that quantum entanglement might enable Non-local consciousness connections, morphic field theories suggest there might be informational fields that brains access rather than generating consciousness entirely locally. These are fringe ideas, not mainstream science, but they're not pure mysticism. They attempt to take non-local consciousness seriously, while remaining within naturalistic frameworks. Alternatively, shared dreaming reports might reveal not literal dream sharing, but something about collective unconscious, shared archetypes, common symbolic languages. If two people from similar cultures and backgrounds dream similar scenarios, this might reflect shared cultural conditioning rather than direct dream connection. They're both drawing from the same cultural reservoir of symbols, narratives, expectations. The dreams align not because they're shared, but because they're independently generated from similar source material. This is Carl Jung's answer. Essentially, there are collective patterns, archetypal structures that appear across individual psyches, because humans share deep psychological structures, collective inheritances from evolutionary history, and cultural transmission. You don't need non-local consciousness to explain similar dreams, just shared human nature and shared environment. What's valuable about the shared dreaming question, regardless of whether it's real, is that it pushes on assumptions about socialness boundaries. We take for granted that consciousness is individual, private, contained. But is that necessarily true, or just how it usually appears? Are there conditions under which consciousness might become less boundaried, more collective, even if literal dream sharing doesn't occur? The question opens space for thinking about consciousness as potentially more fluid, less atomistically individual than common sense assumes. And there are phenomena that suggest consciousness has social dimensions we don't fully understand: group flow states, emotional contagion, the sense of collective consciousness during intense shared experiences. These don't require anything supernatural, but they do suggest consciousness isn't purely individual. We affect each other's conscious states in ways that go beyond explicit communication, through presence, attention, emotion. Perhaps dreams are simply too private, too protected, for this mutual influence to reach, or perhaps, occasionally, under the right conditions, the boundary's thin enough that something passes through, not full argument but whispers, impressions, the sense that someone else was there. There's a problem some experienced lucid dreamers encounter that doesn't get discussed as much as the wonders and possibilities: the difficulty of distinguishing dream memories from waking memories. After hundreds or thousands of lucid dreams, the memories accumulate. You remember dream events with similar vividness and detail to waking events. Sometimes you're unsure whether a particular memory is from waking life or from a dream, especially if the dream was realistic rather than obviously fantastical. This isn't false memory in the pathological sense. You're not confusing dreams with waking life in ways that cause dysfunction. It's more like your memory system treating dream experiences and waking experiences as the same category of event. And cognitively, perhaps they both involve conscious experience, sensory processing, emotional content, both get encoded during sleep dreams during REM, waking memories during consolidation. The brain might not maintain a perfect separation. Research on memory consolidation during sleep shows that the brain actively processes waking experiences during dreams, integrating them, finding patterns, transferring information from hippocampus to cortex for long-term storage. Dreams are part of memory processing, not separate from it. So the boundary between dreaming and remembering is already blurred at the neural level. Dreams incorporate waking memories, and waking memories are processed through dreaming. When you add lucidity, conscious, intentional dream experiences you attend to carefully, the distinction becomes even less clear. Lucid dreams are often more memorable than regular dreams, precisely because you're attending consciously, encoding them more like waking experiences. They don't feel like fading fragments but like events that happened, because from consciousness's perspective, they did happen. You were there, aware, experiencing. That the location was generated by your brain, doesn't change the fact of experience. False memory research adds another layer of complexity. Studies show that human memory is reconstructive rather than reproductive. You don't store perfect recordings and play them back. You store fragments and rebuild memories each time you recall them. And in rebuilding, you introduce errors, elaborations, details from other memories or from imagination. Every memory is partly fiction, and you usually can't tell which parts are accurate and which are reconstructed. If all memory is reconstructive and partially unreliable, then the question, did this really happen, or was it a dream, might not have as clear an answer as we assume. Even waking memories aren't records of what really happened, but reconstructions, interpretations, narratives built from fragments. In a sense, you're always remembering something like a dream, a story your brain tells about the past, not the past itself. This can be unsettling. We rely on memory to maintain continuity of self, to know who we are and what we've experienced. If the boundary between dream and waking memories becomes permeable, identity can feel less stable. Some lucid dreamers develop practices to maintain the distinction. Dream journals marked clearly as dreams, verbal tags when encoding lucid dreams. This is a dream, this is a dream. Periodic review to reinforce which memories are waking and which are dreaming. But maybe there's also an insight here about the nature of memory and self, more broadly. If experience is what matters, if what counts is not whether something objectively happened but whether you consciously experienced it, then perhaps dream experiences are as valid as waking ones for constructing identity. They're experiences you had, generated by your consciousness, involving your emotions, your choices, your awareness. That they happened in dreams doesn't make them less formative, less real, as experiences, less part of who you are. Some philosophers of personal identity argue that what matters for selfhood is psychological continuity, memory, personality, values, not physical continuity of body. In this view, you're the same person over time because you remember being that past person, not because you share cells with them. If this is right, then dream memories contribute to personal identity, just as waking memories do. You are partly constituted by your dreams, especially the lucid ones you remember vividly and integrate into your self-narrative. This doesn't mean dreams and waking are equivalent. There are important practical differences, but it suggests that the relationship between memory, experience, and reality is more complicated than common sense assumes. All experience is real as experience, regardless of its source. All memory is reconstructive interpretation, and selfhood is built from whatever experiences you remember and identify with, whether they happened in consensus reality or in the private reality of dreams. You are the sum of your experiences, and increasingly, for those who explore lucid dreaming deeply, that sum includes rich, memorable, formative dream experiences that can't simply be dismissed as just dreams. They were real experiences, even if they weren't waking ones, and they shape who you are just as surely as anything that happened while the sun was up. Lucid dreaming has traditionally been something you could learn only through patient practice, training your mind slowly to recognize dreams and maintain awareness. But technology is beginning to change this. In the last decade, various devices and techniques have emerged claiming to induce or facilitate lucid dreaming, making what was once rare and difficult potentially accessible to anyone willing to try. One category involves sensory cues delivered during REM sleep. The idea is straightforward. If you can detect when someone is in REM, you can provide a gentle stimulus, a light flash, a sound, a subtle vibration that's noticeable in the dream, but not strong enough to cause waking. If the dreamer has trained to recognize this cue as a sign they're dreaming, it triggers lucidity. Early experiments with this approach showed mixed results, but the concept has been refined significantly. Modern devices use EEG sensors to monitor brain activity and detect REM sleep patterns. When REM is identified, the device delivers the preset cue. Some users report increased lucidity frequency, though individual variation is substantial. The technology works better for people who've already had lucid dreams and know what they're trying to achieve. For complete beginners, the cue might just integrate into the dream without triggering awareness. More experimental approaches involve transcranial electrical stimulation, particularly at gamma frequencies. Research by Ursula Voss and others has shown that applying weak electrical current to the frontal cortex during REM sleep can increase gamma wave activity in the brain, and gamma bursts correlate with lucidity. In controlled studies, participants receiving the stimulation reported more frequent lucid dreams than control groups. The effect is modest but statistically significant, suggesting that lucidity might indeed be inducible through direct brain stimulation. Alan Hobson, one of the pioneers of sleep neuroscience, explored cholinergic enhancement through medications like galantamine. Since acetylcholine is crucial for REM sleep and appears elevated in lucid dreams, increasing its availability might facilitate lucidity. Anecdotal reports and limited studies suggest some effectiveness, though the science remains preliminary. There are questions about long-term safety, about whether chemically induced lucidity differs qualitatively from naturally occurring lucidity, about ethics and cognitive liberty. What's emerging is a landscape where lucid dreaming transitions from rare talent to potentially accessible skill, aided by technology. Not everyone will respond to these interventions. Individual brain differences mean some people lucid dream easily, others struggle despite training, but the trend is toward democratization, toward making consciousness exploration available more widely. This raises questions about what happens when lucid dreaming becomes common. Will it lose its mystique, become routine? Will there be new applications we haven't imagined, or new problems we haven't anticipated? If millions of people are regularly lucid dreaming, does that change culture? Change how we think about consciousness? Change the boundary between sleeping and waking in collective imagination? There's also the possibility of commercialization in troubling directions. Already there are startups promising lucid dreaming on demand, marketing it as productivity tool, entertainment platform, therapy substitute. The rhetoric often oversimplifies, promising benefits without discussing risks, treating consciousness as just another thing to optimize and monetize. There's value in maintaining some humility, recognizing that we're still early in understanding lucid dreaming, and that consciousness deserves respect, not just exploitation for profit. Still, the technological possibilities are genuinely exciting. Imagine being able to reliably enter lucid dreams, to use that state for whatever purposes you choose: creativity, problem solving, psychological exploration, or simply the joy of conscious dreaming. Imagine dream research advancing rapidly, because researchers can communicate with dreamers in real time, can test hypotheses directly within the dream state. Imagine therapeutic applications becoming reliable enough to offer to anyone suffering nightmares or seeking psychological growth. We're at the beginning of this. The tools are crude, the science incomplete, but the trajectory is clear. Lucid dreaming is moving from esoteric practice to accessible technology, from edge of consciousness to potentially common experience, and that transition will bring changes to individuals, to science, to culture that we're only beginning to glimpse. In February 2021, a research team achieved something that would have seemed like science fiction a decade earlier. They successfully communicated with people while they were dreaming. The study, involving laboratories in the United States, France, Germany, and the Netherlands, demonstrated that lucid dreamers could answer questions posed by researchers and solve simple math problems, all while remaining asleep and dreaming, and report their answers through eye movements and facial muscle signals. This breakthrough opens extraordinary research possibilities. For the first time, scientists can study consciousness not just by observing it from outside, but by interacting with it, asking questions, and receiving answers from someone in an altered state. The dreaming mind is no longer black box, but something that can be interrogated, explored, mapped through dialogue rather than just passive observation. Subsequent research has pushed further. Teams are exploring whether dreamers can learn new information delivered during REM sleep and retain it on waking. Early results suggest limited learning is possible, though retention is poor and the conditions have to be precisely right. Others are investigating whether external stimuli can shape dream content more directly, playing music or sounds that integrate into dreams in predictable ways, creating something like directed dreaming. There's even preliminary work on dream-to-dream communication, attempting to see whether two sleeping lucid dreamers can interact, possibly by both responding to shared external cues in coordinated ways. This doesn't mean shared dreaming in the telepathic sense, but it could create a kind of parallel communication, two people solving a problem simultaneously while dreaming, comparing results when both wake. Kenneth Paller's lab at Northwestern is exploring memory consolidation through lucid dreams, testing whether dreamers can deliberately rehearse information during lucid REM, and whether this enhances retention better than normal sleep. The intersection of lucid dreaming and memory research could reveal new insights about how sleep serves learning, how consciousness and unconscious processing interact in storing and integrating information. Meanwhile, some researchers are less interested in applications and more interested in what lucid dreaming reveals about consciousness itself. Thomas Metzinger views lucid dreaming as a natural laboratory for studying self-consciousness, for investigating how metacognitive awareness works, how the sense of self is constructed and can be deconstructed. Lucid dreams offer a window into consciousness that's difficult to access otherwise, a state where you can observe the mind's operations with unusual clarity while they're happening. There's also growing interest in comparing lucid dreaming with other altered states, psychedelic experiences, meditation states, hypnosis, flow. These states share features: altered sense of self, changed relationship with time, reduced critical filtering, increased openness to experience. Understanding what these states have in common and how they differ could help build a more comprehensive map of consciousness, recognizing it not as one mode, but as a space with many possible configurations. One fascinating direction involves virtual reality. Researchers are combining VR with sleep technology, creating systems where sleepers move from VR experience to dream, or where lucid dreams are augmented with VR-like interaction. The boundary between technologically mediated experience and naturally generated dreaming blurs, raising questions about where consciousness resides, whether it matters if experiences are internally or externally generated if the experiential quality is similar. All of this points toward a future where dreams are less private mystery and more accessible territory for exploration. The dreaming mind could become a legitimate research domain, studied with rigor, understood in detail, potentially utilized for purposes we haven't yet imagined. Sleep would no longer be just rest, but opportunity. Hours each night where consciousness enters explorable alternate configurations. Of course, unknowns and uncertainties remain vast. Consciousness is notoriously difficult to study, and dreams more so. Every answer generates new questions, but the sense among researchers is that we're on the edge of significant breakthroughs, that lucid dreaming provides access to aspects of mind previously locked away, that the coming decades will bring discoveries about consciousness that reshape our understanding fundamentally. The mind is vast territory, largely unmapped. Dreams might be the entry point that finally lets us begin serious exploration of inner space. Beyond research and technology, lucid dreaming is finding applications in therapy, expanding from nightmare treatment into broader psychological intervention. The evidence is still building, but the trajectory suggests lucid dreaming might become a standard tool in clinical practice for certain conditions, a way to access and work with psychological material that's difficult to reach through conventional talk therapy. The most established application remains nightmare treatment, particularly for PTSD. The protocol combines imagery rehearsal therapy with lucid dreaming training. Patients first learn to revisit nightmares while awake and mentally rehearse alternative outcomes. Then they train for lucidity, so they can implement those alternatives when the nightmare recurs. The combination appears effective. Studies show reduced nightmare frequency, improved sleep quality, and decreased PTSD symptoms overall. What makes this work isn't just changing the nightmare's content, but changing the relationship to it. Becoming lucid means you're no longer helplessly trapped in the traumatic replay. You have agency, choice, the ability to respond differently, even if you don't succeed in changing the dream. The mere fact of being conscious in it shifts the experience from something happening to you to something you're navigating. The psychological impact is significant. Researchers are now exploring lucid dreaming for other anxiety-related conditions. For phobias, lucid dreams offer a safe exposure environment. You can face your fear, heights, spiders, social situations, knowing intellectually that you're dreaming, that nothing can actually harm you. The exposure feels real enough to trigger therapeutic habituation, but the safety is absolute in ways real-world exposure never is. Grief processing is another emerging application. Some therapists help clients use lucid dreams to have final conversations with deceased loved ones, to say things left unsaid, to achieve closure. This isn't communicating with the dead, but with mental representations of them, with the aspects of that person you've internalized. The conversation is with yourself, essentially, but experienced as dialogue with the other. For some people, this provides healing that waking imagination alone doesn't accomplish, perhaps because dreams feel less controlled, less self-conscious, more emotionally authentic. Social anxiety and confidence building are areas where some practitioners use lucid dreaming as rehearsal space. You can practice difficult conversations, interview situations, public speaking, experiencing them vividly without real-world stakes. It's similar to mental rehearsal athletes use, but more immersive, engaging emotional systems in ways pure visualization might not. There are also intriguing case reports of lucid dreaming helping with depression, though mechanisms are unclear, and evidence is anecdotal. Some people report that regularly experiencing the freedom and possibility of lucid dreams provides perspective on waking life's constraints, reduces sense of helplessness, or simply offers respite, brief periods where the heaviness lifts. This isn't cure, but it might be valuable supplementary practice for some individuals. Of course, therapeutic applications require care. Not everyone responds well to lucid dreaming training. For some people, particularly those with certain dissociative disorders or psychotic conditions, deliberately destabilizing the boundary between dream and waking could be counterproductive. Therapists working in this area emphasize careful assessment, contraindications, gradual introduction with close monitoring. There's also the question of whether therapeutic gains in dreams transfer to waking life. Evidence suggests they can, but not automatically. Integration work, discussing dream experiences, connecting them to waking challenges, deliberately practicing new patterns in daily life, seems necessary for dream work to produce lasting change. The dream isn't magic solution, but tool, one element in broader therapeutic process. What's exciting is the potential for psychology to take dreams seriously as therapeutic space, as domain where consciousness can work on itself with less interference from waking defenses and habitual patterns. Dreams have always been part of depth psychology, but mostly interpreted retrospectively. Lucid dreaming allows active engagement, deliberate psychological work in the dream state itself. If this develops as hoped, we might see a renaissance of dream work in therapy. Recognition that the 8 hours we spend sleeping offer opportunities for healing and growth that we've barely begun to explore systematically. The history of science and art is dotted with famous dreams. Kekule's vision of the Ouroboros leading to the benzene ring structure, Mendeleev's dream organization of the periodic table, Mary Shelley's nightmare-inspiring Frankenstein, Paul McCartney hearing Yesterday in a Dream. These anecdotes suggest dreams have creative power, that unconscious processing during sleep can generate insights unavailable. Waking thought, lucid dreaming offers the possibility of harnessing this creativity deliberately. Instead of hoping for lucky dream inspiration, you could potentially use lucid dreams as intentional creative workspace, posing problems before sleep and exploring solutions during conscious dreaming. Some artists, writers, and scientists are already experimenting with this. The results are mixed and anecdotal. The theory is compelling. REM sleep is associated with increased activity in brain networks responsible for associative thinking, for connecting disparate information in novel ways. Neurotransmitter balances favor broad associative exploration over focused logical analysis. Lucid dreaming could allow conscious direction of this exploratory mode, letting you pursue creative questions while your brain is optimized for novel connections. Research on creativity and sleep supports the general idea. Studies show that people often solve problems after sleeping on them, particularly problems requiring insight rather than logic. REM sleep seems especially valuable for this, more so than non-REM sleep. The sleeping brain continues working on problems presented before sleep, and solutions sometimes emerge either in dreams or immediately upon waking. What lucid dreaming adds is consciousness, the ability to actively explore the creative space rather than just waiting for solutions to emerge. You can ask dream characters questions, expecting answers that represent unconscious processing. You can manipulate dream objects or scenarios, looking for novel configurations. You can explore dream environments, knowing that unusual or impossible elements might spark creative insights. Some lucid dreamers report extraordinary creative experiences, musical compositions heard fully formed, visual art glimpsed in dream galleries, stories narrated by dream characters, scientific concepts explained by dream teachers. Whether these represent genuinely novel insights or just recombinations of existing knowledge is hard to determine, but even recombination can be creative. Much of human innovation involves connecting known elements in new ways, rather than pure novelty. The challenge is retention. Dreams fade quickly, and even lucid dreams can be difficult to remember in detail upon waking. Artists and scientists working with lucid dreams emphasize the importance of immediate recording, waking fully to take notes, or using voice recording to capture dreams while still in hypnopompic state. Some practice visualizing dream content repeatedly during the dream itself to strengthen encoding. There's also the question of whether dream-generated material is actually good. Dreams can feel profound without being so. The logic that makes perfect sense in the dream often falls apart in waking analysis. Lucid dreamers note that critical judgment is often impaired even when lucid, so dream creativity requires waking evaluation. Some dream ideas survive scrutiny, many don't. Still, the potential is intriguing. Imagine regularly using 6 to 8 hours of sleep, not just for rest, but for creative exploration, for working on projects at a different level of consciousness. Even if only a fraction of dream insights prove valuable, it would add substantially to creative capacity, and the process itself might have value beyond specific outputs. Engaging with imagination in such direct, vivid ways could enhance creative thinking generally. There are practical limitations. Not everyone lucid dreams easily or frequently. Deliberately using dreams for work might reduce sleep quality, defeating the purpose. The line between productive creative exploration and wakeful interference with needed rest is unclear, and there's something to be said for letting sleep be sleep, for respecting the boundary between work and rest, between waking striving and unconscious processing. But for those who explore it carefully, lucid dreaming as creative tool offers something genuinely new, a way to engage consciously with the creative unconscious, to collaborate deliberately with the aspects of mind that operate outside waking awareness. Whether this becomes common practice or remains niche experimentation, it represents an expansion of what we think possible, another way consciousness can work on itself, another space where the strange capacities of the dreaming mind might serve waking purposes. It's worth considering where this could go wrong. Technology and consciousness always raise ethical concerns. and lucid dreaming is no exception. As the practice becomes more accessible, as commercial interests grow, as applications multiply, we'll face questions about cognitive liberty, mental privacy, exploitation, and the risks of untethered consciousness. One concern is addiction. Dreams can be more exciting, more pleasurable, more free than waking life. If you can fly, explore fantasy worlds, experience impossible things nightly, why engage with mundane reality? Some lucid dreamers report struggling with this, spending excessive time trying to induce lucid dreams, prioritizing sleep over waking activities, feeling disappointed by ordinary life's limitations. For most, this is temporary, a phase they move through, but for some, it might become problematic, a form of dissociation or escapism that interferes with functioning. As technology makes lucid dreaming more reliably accessible, this risk increases. If you can trigger lucid dreams on demand, might they become addictive? Might some people retreat increasingly into dream worlds, neglecting waking responsibilities and relationships? The comparison to virtual reality or gaming addiction is obvious. Lucid dreams would be more immersive, more personal, potentially more compelling than any external entertainment. There's also the potential for commercial exploitation. Imagine advertising in dreams, techniques for implanting brand messages into dream content, or worse, devices that deliver ads during sleep. The technology for influencing dream content exists. The ethical barriers against using it for advertising are not yet established. Your sleeping mind could become contested territory, your dreams infiltrated by commercial interests. Mental privacy is another concern. If devices can monitor brain activity and detect dream content, even crudely, that information could be extracted, stored, analyzed. Your dreams are among the most private aspects of your mental life. Unguarded thoughts, secret fears, fantasies you'd never share. If that becomes accessible to corporations or governments, the implications for privacy and autonomy are profound. Some researchers worry about psychological risk, particularly for vulnerable populations. Could lucid dreaming training trigger dissociative episodes in people predisposed to dissociation? Might it worsen symptoms for people with certain mental health conditions? The practice involves deliberately blurring boundaries between states of consciousness, questioning reality, reducing certainty about what's real. For psychologically healthy people, this is usually benign, but for those with fragile reality testing or unstable sense of self, it could be destabilizing. There are also societal level concerns. If lucid dreaming becomes common, does it change collective relationship to consensus reality? Some philosophers worry about reality drift, gradual erosion of shared commitment to common reality, as people spend increasing time in personalized, controllable dream worlds. This might sound far-fetched, but we're already seeing versions of it. Filter bubbles, alternative facts, virtual communities replacing geographic ones. Lucid dreaming could intensify this fragmentation. Then there's the question of inequality. If lucid dreaming becomes something people use productively for problem solving, creativity, therapy, skill practice, those with access to training and technology gain advantages. Sleep becomes productive time, another domain of optimization and competition. Those who can't or don't lucid dream fall further behind. The pressure to optimize every hour, to turn even sleep into work, would intensify. Perhaps most fundamentally, there's the question of whether we should be hacking consciousness at all. Some argue that dreams have evolved functions we don't fully understand, that interfering with natural sleep might have costs that aren't immediately obvious. There's value in respecting processes that have developed over millions of years, in approaching consciousness with humility, rather than assumption that we can improve it through intervention. None of these concerns mean lucid dreaming should be avoided or prohibited, but they suggest the need for ethical frameworks, for protections and principles guiding how this territory is explored and commercialized. Cognitive liberty, the right to control your own consciousness, should be fundamental. Mental privacy should be protected. Access should be equitable. Applications should be approached carefully, with attention to risks as well as benefits. The frontier of consciousness exploration is opening. How we navigate it matters. Lucid dreaming offers extraordinary possibilities, but like any powerful tool, it brings responsibilities and risks we're only beginning to recognize. Moving forward wisely requires balancing enthusiasm with caution, wonder with humility, innovation with protection of what's most intimate and essential about human consciousness. So what have we found on this journey through lucid dreaming and the questions it opens? Not definitive answers. Consciousness doesn't yield those easily, but perspectives, possibilities, a richer sense of what awareness might be and what we might be capable of. Perhaps it's time to gather the threads gently, to see what patterns emerge without forcing them into rigid conclusions. We've seen that lucid dreaming is real, measurable, trainable, not mystical or supernatural, but a natural capacity of human consciousness that science is beginning to understand. The brain can support multiple modes of awareness, simultaneously dreaming while knowing you're dreaming, observing experience while generating it. This hybrid state reveals consciousness not as binary, awake or asleep, aware or unaware, but as spectrum, as complex coordination of multiple processes that can be configured in different ways. We've explored the neuroscience, the prefrontal cortex reactivating during REV, metacognitive networks coming online, gamma bursts correlating with lucidity. The architecture is fascinating, showing how self-awareness works at the neural level, how consciousness can observe itself through specific patterns of activation. Yet the neuroscience, detailed as it is, doesn't quite capture the experience, the strangeness of being two things at once, the wonder of consciousness folding back on itself. We've considered what lucid dreams feel like, the extraordinary vividness, the heightened emotion, the sense of freedom mixed with the fragility of maintaining awareness. We've met dream characters who seem autonomous yet aren't, explored worlds that feel real yet are generated entirely by sleeping minds. The phenomenology is rich, varied, sometimes delightful, and sometimes unsettling, always revealing something about consciousness's creative power. We've ventured into philosophical territory, asking whether lucid dreams might teach us something about reality itself. If dreams can feel as real as waking life, sometimes more real, what does real mean? If consciousness can generate entire convincing worlds, might waking reality also be constructed, participatory, less independent of consciousness than we assume? These questions don't have clear answers, but they're worth sitting with, worth considering as possibilities rather than certainties. We've looked at identity and selfhood, at the strange question of who the dreamer is when consciousness splits into observer and observed. The self revealed in lucid dreams is multiple, processual, less unified than everyday experience suggests. This might be unsettling, or it might be liberating. Recognition that you're not one fixed thing but a flowing process, capable of change, configuration, new ways of being. We've examined practical applications, therapy, creativity, problem solving, the technological horizons opening up. Lucid dreaming moves from curiosity to tool, from rare experience to potentially accessible practice. With that accessibility come both opportunities and risks, both excitement about possibilities and need for ethical consideration, for protecting what's intimate and vulnerable about consciousness. And throughout we've returned to wonder, to the simple, profound strangeness of being conscious at all, of awareness emerging from matter, of the fact that you exist, and know you exist, and can know that you know. Lucid dreaming highlights this miracle by showing consciousness observing itself directly, awareness becoming aware of awareness. It's a reminder that consciousness, whether in dreams or waking life, is extraordinary, mysterious, worthy of respect and curiosity. What we've discovered, perhaps, is that the questions are more valuable than answers, that consciousness is stranger than we thought, more flexible, more multiple, that the boundary between dreaming and waking, between real and imagined, between self and world, is less solid than common sense suggests, that we're capable of more than we assume, but also more mysterious to ourselves, less transparent, less completely known, and maybe that's exactly where we should land, not on firm conclusions, but on humble, curious uncertainty, on recognition that consciousness is vast territory, mostly unexplored, full of possibilities we haven't discovered, that each lucid dream is a small voyage into that territory, a reminder that the mind is larger and stranger than everyday awareness reveals. The practice of lucid dreaming changes how you relate to experience. Once you've spent time becoming conscious in dreams, questioning whether you're dreaming, testing reality, the habit follows you into waking life. You notice assumptions more readily. You catch yourself taking things for granted. You recognize the constructed nature of experience, not as abstract philosophical claim, but as felt reality, something you've encountered directly. This doesn't mean living in constant doubt, unable to commit to anything as real. Most lucid dreamers report the opposite. Waking life feels more vivid, more present, precisely because they're paying closer attention. The reality testing practice cultivates a kind of mindfulness, a here-now awareness that notices details, questions interpretations, remains open to possibility. There's a particular quality of consciousness that lucid dreaming develops. Call it metacognitive flexibility, the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, being an experience while also observing it, taking something seriously while recognizing it, as constructed, committing fully while maintaining awareness that other possibilities exist. This is valuable capacity, applicable far beyond dreams. In difficult situations, metacognitive flexibility allows you to be present in the difficulty, while also recognizing it as temporary, constructed, interpretable in multiple ways. You're not denying the difficulty or escaping into detachment. You're experiencing it fully while also maintaining awareness that your experience of it is one perspective, shaped by interpretation, potentially changeable through reframing. This is psychologically sophisticated, and lucid dreaming offers a training ground for developing it. Some practitioners describe a sense of living between worlds, neither fully convinced by waking reality's solidity, nor lost in dream confusion, but holding both lightly, recognizing all experience as experience, whether it occurs during sleep or waking. This might sound untethered or dissociative, but it's usually the opposite, more grounded, more present, more able to engage fully because you're not clinging desperately to one story about reality. There's also a shift in how you relate to possibility. Dreams show you directly that impossible things are possible, at least possible to experience, possible to consciousness, and while you can't literally fly in waking life, the felt sense that reality might be more open than it appears, that constraints might be more negotiable, affects how you approach challenges. You try things you might not have tried, question assumptions more readily, hold beliefs less rigidly. This doesn't guarantee better outcomes. Reality does push back, does constrain. An overconfidence about flexibility can lead to problems, but the general stance, engaging reality with curiosity rather than certainty, treating experience as exploratory rather than fixed, tends toward resilience, creativity, psychological health. Perhaps most valuably, lucid dreaming practice cultivates comfort with uncertainty. You become familiar with not knowing, with moving through experiences whose reality status is ambiguous, with tolerating the discomfort of fundamental questions that can't be definitively answered. This comfort with uncertainty is increasingly necessary in a world where information overwhelms, where complexity resists simple answers, where humility and flexibility matter more than rigid certainty. Living between worlds doesn't mean abandoning commitment to what you know and value. It means holding your knowledge and values with awareness that their perspectives, constructions, interpretations, real and meaningful, yet not absolute, not the only possibilities. It means engaging fully while remaining open, taking stands while admitting you might be wrong, committing to beliefs while recognizing their contingency. Both dreaming and waking become states of consciousness worth exploring, worth taking seriously, neither one absolute privileged. You don't dismiss waking life as just another dream, but you also don't dismiss dreams as merely dreams. Both are experiences, both reveal aspects of consciousness, both offer opportunities for learning, growth, wonder, and living between them, moving fluidly across that threshold. You might discover that consciousness is more spacious, more interesting, more multiple than you realized. Not one thing, not one way of being, but an ongoing exploration of what awareness can be and do and become. Beneath all the neuroscience and philosophy, the techniques and applications, there's something simpler and perhaps more important. Lucid dreaming restores wonder. It reminds you that consciousness is strange, that existence is improbable, that awareness observing itself is genuinely miraculous regardless of how common or explicable it becomes. Consider the basic fact: you exist. Not just as biological organism, but as subjective experience, as first-person awareness, as something it's like to be. This is extraordinary. The universe is mostly unconscious matter, energy following laws, patterns repeating without anyone witnessing them. But here, in you, in human beings, matter has become aware of itself. Atoms configured in particular ways generate consciousness, and that consciousness can wonder about its own existence. Lucid dreaming highlights this by showing consciousness, observing consciousness, awareness becoming aware of awareness. It's consciousness squared, existence reflecting on existence in real time. When you're lucid in a dream, you're experiencing one of the most direct encounters possible with the mystery of awareness, watching your mind generate experience while knowing that's what's happening, participating in creation and observation simultaneously. Most of the time, we take consciousness for granted. It's always there, so familiar we stop noticing it. But lucid dreaming defamiliarizes consciousness, makes it strange again, returns it to wonder. After becoming lucid in a dream, waking consciousness itself can seem remarkable. The fact that you're aware, that you're experiencing, that there's something it's like to be you. This wonder isn't about supernatural or mystical claims. It's simpler, recognition that consciousness, however it works mechanically, is astonishing, that subjective experience exists at all, that the lights are on inside, that there's someone home. This is profound, worthy of awe, regardless of neural explanations. And lucid dreaming offers this wonder as direct experience, not just intellectual acknowledgement. You feel the strangeness of being aware in a dream. You feel the peculiarity of consciousness watching itself. You feel the improbability of existence, the gift of awareness, the miracle of being. Some people find this overwhelming at first, almost too much. The sense of reality's strangeness, of consciousness's mystery, can be disorienting when fully felt rather than just thought about. But most settle into it, finding that wonder is enriching rather than destabilizing, that awe and groundedness can coexist, that recognizing mystery doesn't require abandoning functionality. There's also wonder in the questions that remain unanswered. We don't know what consciousness really is, how subjective experience arises from physical processes, why there's something it's like to be rather than just mechanistic function, without awareness. These aren't just gaps in scientific knowledge, but potentially fundamental mysteries, and lucid dreaming brings you face to face with them, consciousness encountering itself, unable to fully explain itself, mysterious to itself. Perhaps this is the deepest value of lucid dreaming, not control or power, not practical applications, but restoration of wonder, return to mystery, recognition of consciousness as gift rather than given. It invites you to appreciate awareness, to marvel at existence, to engage with the improbable fact of being with curiosity and gratitude. You don't need to lucid dream to access this wonder. Contemplative practices, philosophical reflection, even just pausing to notice that you're noticing can bring it. But lucid dreaming offers a particularly vivid entry point, a dramatic encounter with consciousness's strangeness that's hard to dismiss or intellectualize away. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the value isn't in what you learn or achieve, but in the wonder itself, in spending time with mystery, in touching the fundamental strangeness of being conscious. Maybe the questions don't need answers, the mystery doesn't need solving. Maybe it's enough to recognize that you're aware, that existence is improbable and extraordinary, that consciousness, awake or dreaming, is worthy of awe. The wonder is the gift, and lucid dreaming wraps it in experience, so direct, so vivid that you can't help but feel it. That feeling, that recognition, that awe, perhaps that's what we've been exploring all along. Not techniques or theories, but the simple, profound fact. Consciousness exists, and it's remarkable. You exist, and it's remarkable. And whether you're awake or dreaming, aware or unaware, that remarkability remains, worthy of attention, worthy of wonder, worthy of gratitude. We've traveled far together tonight, through consciousness and dreams, through questions that open into further questions, through the strange territory where awareness folds back on itself. You've been patient with the journey, letting ideas settle, considering possibilities, wandering alongside this exploration. And now gently, it's time to release all of it, to let the questions drift, to allow sleep, whatever form it takes, to arrive naturally. Perhaps tonight, or some night soon, you'll become lucid in a dream. You'll be walking through some impossible landscape, and suddenly recognize this is a dream. You'll feel that distinctive shift, that dual awareness, consciousness observing itself across the boundary of sleep. And if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, that's equally fine. The dreaming mind is already extraordinary, already creative and strange and beautiful. Whether or not awareness flickers on to notice it, or perhaps you'll sleep deeply, dreamlessly, dropping into the restorative darkness that consciousness needs. The periods of rest where awareness steps back completely and the brain does its maintenance work invisibly. That's valuable too. Not every night needs to be an adventure. Sometimes the best thing consciousness can do is stop, let go, surrender to unconsciousness without grasping for lucidity or experience or anything at all. There's no pressure to remember any of this. The ideas we've explored can dissolve now, released like dream images fading in morning light. If something stays with you, if some thread of wonder or curiosity remains, it will surface when useful. If everything fades, that's perfect too. You don't need to hold on to anything. The journey was in the traveling, not in the destination or the souvenirs. Your breathing has its own rhythm, slow and steady, or light and soft, whatever feels natural. Your body knows how to sleep, how to transition from waking to dreaming to deep rest, and back again. You've done this thousands of times, we'll do it thousands more. Tonight is just one more night, one more journey through the territories of consciousness that sleep brings. Familiar and strange, safe and endlessly mysterious. If thoughts arise, let them pass like clouds. If awareness notices itself, that's fine. If awareness dissolves completely, even better. Everything is exactly as it should be. You're exactly where you need to be. Consciousness will do what consciousness does, sometimes watching, sometimes sleeping, sometimes lucid, and sometimes lost. Always changing, always flowing, always itself even as it transforms. The night is long enough for rest, for dreams, for restoration. You don't need to do anything, achieve anything, become anything. Just this, breathing, settling, releasing, just this. allowing sleep to arrive in its own time, in its own way, without effort or forcing. Just this, letting go of waking, letting go of control, letting go of the need to be aware. The dreaming mind is waiting, whether you meet it consciously or not. The deep rest is there, whether you notice it or not. And tomorrow, when awareness returns with daylight, everything will begin again. The questions and wonders, the experiences and interpretations, the ongoing mystery of being conscious. But for now, only rest, only sleep, only the gentle dark, the quiet mind, the breath slowing, letting everything soften and dissolve. Perhaps you're dreaming already. Perhaps this voice is already part of a dream. Consciousness encountering itself through words that dissolve even as they're heard. Perhaps you're awake, still listening. It doesn't matter, real or dream, waking or sleeping. What matters is only this: peace, rest, the gentle release into whatever comes next. Sleep well, dream or don't dream. Be aware or let awareness go. Everything is fine, everything is exactly right. The night holds you softly, consciousness rests, and in that rest, in that letting go, there's all the lucidity you need, the recognition that you can stop trying, stop seeking, stop wondering, and simply be, simply rest, simply sleep.